Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Have you ever felt like time is slipping through your fingers, like you're missing pieces of your own life? I never thought it was possible until it started happening to me. It started subtly at first, the smallest things, moments I couldn't quite remember. A conversation with a friend, a walk down a familiar street, a glance at a clock that seemed to show a time I hadn't seen. At first, I brushed it off. Who doesn't forget things now and then? But the more it happened, the harder it became to ignore. These weren't just simple lapses in memory. They were gaps. A hollow space in the timeline of my life. An entire chunk of time that had disappeared. As if it had never happened. I tried to tell myself that I was just tired, overworked, distracted, but the feeling of loss only grew. The unease was always there, lurking just below the surface. And it wasn't just time. It was the absence of something I should have remembered but couldn't. I remember the first time it really hit me when I walked into my apartment one evening and everything looked wrong. Like it had been rearranged. The couch cushions were slightly off-center and the coffee table seemed closer to the door than I remembered. Nothing major, but it was different. And it made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been in here, moving things, touching things. I checked the door locks. All of them were secure. I told myself I was being paranoid, but something inside me didn't buy it. I went to the kitchen for some water, but as I reached for the cabinet, I froze. There, in the corner of the room, was a photo. One that shouldn't have been there. It was a picture of me and a friend I hadn't seen in years, sitting in front of a cafe with our arms draped over the back of the chairs, smiling like we had no care in the world. The problem was, I didn't remember taking that picture. I didn't remember that day at all. It wasn't one of those happy, fond memories that I had locked away. No. It was foreign to me. My heart skipped a beat, and I took a step closer, reaching for the photo. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The edges were worn, like it had been there for much longer than I could remember. The face of my friend, a woman I used to know well, seemed off. There was something wrong with her smile. It was too wide. Too forced. I put the photo down quickly, like it was too much to handle. My breath caught in my throat. I turned away, trying to shake off the unease, but the feeling clung to me, suffocating me. I had never been this scared in my life. My mind raced to make sense of what was happening. But there was no answer. There was no logical explanation. As I stood there, frozen in the middle of my living room, I heard it. A soft scratching sound. It came from the hallway. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe a pipe. But then it came again. The sound of something dragging, scratching, across the floor. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. My pulse quickened, and I found myself instinctively taking a step back. It's nothing. It's just my mind playing tricks on me. But the sound kept coming. Closer. And closer. I turned toward the hallway, the door at the end of it still ajar. My apartment was quiet, but it felt like something was wrong. The air was too still, too thick. I felt like I was being watched. My breath hitched as I glanced at the hallway again, straining to hear any movement. And then, nothing. Silence. I waited, breath caught in my throat, every muscle in my body tensed and ready to flee. But the silence stretched, pulling at the edges of my sanity. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to convince myself that I had imagined it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It wasn't a trick of my mind. Something was here. Something I couldn't understand. My eyes darted to the clock on the wall. The second hand had stopped moving. Stuck at 3:17. The numbers blurred before my eyes, and I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the confusion in my mind. How long had I been standing there? It's just a malfunction, I told myself, but even I didn't believe it. I walked cautiously down the hallway, the sound of my own footsteps loud in the silence. My heartbeat drummed in my ears, each step making my skin crawl, but I had to know. I had to understand. At the end of the hallway, the door to my bedroom was wide open. The dim light from the living room spilled into the dark room, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally. The scratching noise was louder now. It came from inside the room. It sounded like nails. Something scratching against the walls. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn and run, to get out of the apartment, to leave everything behind. But I couldn't. My legs refused to move. And then, in the far corner of the room, I saw it. A figure. A shape, too vague to make out fully, but it was there. Just standing there. It wasn't a person. It wasn't human. It was wrong. I couldn't tell if it was facing me, but I could feel its presence, cold and suffocating. My breathing became shallow. The scratching noise stopped. And in that instant, I realized the thing in my room. It wasn't just a stranger. It wasn't something external. It was me. It was me, but not me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the thing in the corner of the room. Time had stopped making sense the moment I stepped into that hallway. I could feel my pulse hammering against my chest, like it was trying to break free from my body. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. I tried to move, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I knew it was aware of me. It was as if it had always been there, waiting for me to see it. Waiting for me to notice the empty spaces in my mind, the missing fragments of my life. And now, here it was. A reflection of everything I had lost. I closed my eyes, desperately trying to convince myself that it wasn't real, that it was just some product of my mind playing tricks on me. But when I opened them again, it was still there. The darkness in the corner seemed to grow, as if it were pulling the very light from the room. It felt like I was drowning in that darkness. Like it was wrapping around me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, as if something invisible was choking the sound from my lips. It's just my mind, I told myself again, but it sounded less convincing each time. The figure didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. I could feel it closing in on me. I could almost hear it, whispers, low and indistinct, like voices just out of reach. They scraped against my mind, pulling at the edges of my sanity. I needed to escape. I had to get out of that room. I took a step back, and then another. My feet stumbled over the carpet, and I nearly tripped over the edge of the bed. I reached for the doorframe, my hand shaking as I grasped it, but as soon as I touched it, the door slammed shut in front of me with a deafening bang. I jumped back, my heart nearly leaping out of my chest. The sound reverberated in the small room, echoing in my ears. I turned, looking frantically around for another way out, but there was nothing. The room was closing in on me. The walls felt like they were shifting, moving in on me. I pounded on the door, my knuckles aching from the impact. "Let me out!" I shouted, but the words felt hollow, swallowed by the oppressive silence. There was no response. The only sound was the faint scraping of nails on the wood. I backed away, my mind racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I had to find a way to break free from this nightmare. I needed to find out what was happening to me, why my life was slipping away in fragments. That's when I heard it. The sound wasn't just in my mind anymore. It was real. It was a soft, wet sound, like something was dragging across the floor behind me. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the middle of the room, was a shadow, long and distorted. It stretched across the floor like a stain. But the most unsettling thing wasn't its shape, it was what was moving within it. Something was crawling. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. I tried to take a step back, but my legs refused to move. My body was paralyzed by fear. My mind screamed at me to run, but all I could do was watch as the shadow slowly shifted, taking form. The shape began to take on more solid form, a twisted, misshapen silhouette. It was like nothing human, nothing familiar. It had too many limbs, too many angles, as though it had been stitched together from nightmares. Its movements were jerky, disjointed, and it dragged itself closer with a sickening wet sound. My breath caught in my throat. No. No, no, no. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. But it was. It was real. The thing that crawled towards me had no face, at least, not a human one. Its features were twisted, a grotesque mockery of a person's head. Its skin was dark, slick with something that glistened in the dim light. The arms, it had too many, twisted and curled like broken branches, dragging its grotesque body closer. And its eyes, they were empty. Hollow. But somehow, they looked at me. They saw me. I could feel it in my gut, the crushing weight of dread settling over me. Every instinct told me to run, to flee, to do anything to escape. But my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The thing came closer, its breath wet and heavy, like it was drowning in its own darkness. I couldn't move. And then, as if it were mocking me, it stopped. Right in front of me. The wet, choking breaths it took echoed in my ears. Its limbs twitched, stretching out, moving in impossible directions. It opened its mouth, a jagged, unnatural slit that seemed to stretch farther than it should have, and I felt its breath on my face. That's when I heard the whisper. Not from the creature. Not from the thing that shouldn't exist. But from inside my own mind. It's you. I didn't need to understand what it meant. I knew. The creature was me. Not the person I had been, not the one I remembered, but the part of me I had buried. The part of me that I had lost. The part of me that had come alive in the absence of all those forgotten moments. The room was spinning now. The air was thick, suffocating. My mind was fraying at the edges. I need to wake up. I need to escape. but there was no escape. There was only the crawling thing in front of me and the empty spaces in my mind that it had come to fill. I don't know how long I stood there, trapped in the suffocating silence of that room, the thing, the shadow, still inches away from me. My body was numb, too paralyzed to move. My hands felt cold, almost like they were no longer my own. The air was heavy with a musty, metallic scent, like blood and rust, swirling in the corners of the room. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, slowly suffocating any rational thought I had left. "It's you," the whisper repeated in my mind, louder this time, more insistent. It clawed at my sanity, tearing apart the thin veil of reason that still hung over me. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but my voice refused to come. My throat was tight, choked by fear, by the suffocating grip of something that was no longer just a figment of my imagination. It was real. It was real, and it was here with me. The creature, the shadow, had stopped moving, its grotesque form frozen in place like it was studying me. It had no eyes, but I could feel it watching, examining me, as if it knew every single piece of me. Every piece of my mind that had fallen apart over the years. Every memory that had slipped through my fingers. It was as though it had been feeding on my weakness, on my fear. The pieces I had lost, the parts one had forgotten, were all here now, manifesting before me in a form I couldn't comprehend. The room felt smaller now. It was closing in, the walls bending inward, shifting with a life of their own. I could hear it, the slow creak of the wood, the soft, wet sound of the creature's limbs dragging along the floor. It was coming closer again, dragging itself forward in that horrible, jerking motion, each movement like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I closed my eyes again, trying to block it out, trying to ignore the rising panic that surged through me like a tidal wave. I couldn't breathe. My mind was unraveling, threads of reality slipping through my fingers like sand. "Wake up," I told myself. "This is a dream. It has to be." But it wasn't. I could feel it. I could feel the wetness of the air, the sharpness of my breaths, the coldness of the floor beneath my feet. This was real. "You can't escape," the whisper came again, and this time it wasn't in my mind. It was a voice, a low rasping sound that slithered out from between the cracks in the walls. It seemed to come from everywhere, echoing in the room, surrounding me. It was mocking me, telling me the truth I had been trying to avoid. There was no escape. I had lost myself long ago, and now I had to face the consequences. I staggered backward, my body moving of its own accord, pushing me further into the corner. My heart was pounding in my chest, too loud, too fast. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the roar of it. The room was spinning, the edges of my vision blurring, and yet the creature was still there, getting closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. I had to make it stop. In a desperate, frantic movement, I reached for the lamp on the nightstand beside me, gripping it tightly in my hand. It was heavy, a solid thing I could hold on to. Maybe if I could break something, maybe if I could make a sound, maybe it would all end. I raised it above my head, my arm shaking, and then brought it down with all my strength onto the floor. The sound was deafening, a crack, a splintering of wood and glass, and for a moment the room was filled with a sharp, bright light. But as quickly as it had come, the light vanished, leaving me in darkness again. The creature hadn't moved. It hadn't even flinched. I froze, staring at the thing in the corner, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. It's not real. It's not real. It's in my head. It's just in my head. But no matter how many times I told myself that, it didn't make it any less real. The whispers grew louder, and with them, the oppressive feeling of being watched, of being hunted, closed in on me. I could feel it now, crawling under my skin, burrowing into my thoughts, digging into the gaps in my memory, like a worm chewing through my brain. I couldn't think straight anymore. I couldn't even remember what had happened before I woke up in this place. It felt like there had been a gap in time, like I had lost pieces of myself along the way. Every time I tried to reach back, to grab onto something solid, something familiar, it slipped away. And now there was only this. Only the creature. Only the darkness. You can't remember. The voice wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was clear, sharp, as though the creature was speaking directly into my ear. The words burrowed deep into my mind, pulling at the threads of memory I had lost. You've forgotten. You've forgotten who you are. I recoiled, clutching my head in my hands as though I could somehow force the thoughts away. The walls seemed to close in further. The air grew colder, the whispers growing louder until they were a deafening cacophony in my skull. And all the while, the thing, it just stared at me, waiting, watching. And then, it moved again. This time, it wasn't slow. It wasn't dragging itself. It was fast, too fast, its limbs stretching out toward me like reaching hands. I didn't even have time to scream before the creature was upon me. I tried to fight, tried to push it away, but it was as if my hands passed through it. It wasn't solid. It was nothing but shadow, but I could feel it, a sickening, bone-chilling presence pressing against me. You can't escape, the voice whispered again, right against my ear, as if it was already inside me. And that's when it hit me. The reason I couldn't escape, the reason the creature felt like a part of me, was because it was a part of me. This thing was not a monster from some dark corner of my mind. It was me. My fears. My memories. My broken self, all tangled up in the spaces I couldn't remember. The creature was the sum of all the lost moments. The moments I had tried to forget. And now it was here. To remind me. The thing's presence was suffocating. It pressed against my chest like 1,000 invisible hands, each one choking the breath from me. The shadows around me warped and twisted, stretching like claws that wanted to tear at my skin, and yet I couldn't move. My limbs were frozen, locked in place by fear, or maybe something worse. The thing, the creature, wasn't just a figment of my broken mind. It was a reflection of everything I had tried to bury. I tried to scream again, but my voice was swallowed by the thick, oppressive silence that had enveloped the room. The air was so cold now, so biting, that it stung my skin, and I could see my breath in short, shallow gasps. It's coming, I thought. It's going to. The creature was closer now. I could feel it, its essence swirling around me like a fog, enveloping me in a terrible embrace. I wanted to push it away, to fight, but it wasn't solid. It wasn't anything I could touch. It was everywhere and nowhere, a feeling more than a shape. But still, it was here, and I couldn't deny it anymore. You're nothing, the voice rasped. It was low, guttural, like something that had crawled out of the deepest pits of hell. The sound came from all around me, but not in my ears. It came from inside me. You've forgotten what you are. What you were. My heart pounded harder now, and I felt something crack inside me, something fragile that had been holding me together. The creature's voice was like a poison, spreading throughout my body, breaking apart whatever was left of my will. My mind scrambled to remember, to find something, anything, that could make sense of this nightmare. Who am I? I asked myself, but the question felt like a lie. I didn't have the answers anymore. I didn't know who I was. I didn't even know how I had gotten here. My memories felt like they had been swept away by an unseen tide, leaving only empty spaces in their wake. The floor creaked beneath me, sharp and deliberate, and I knew it was the thing moving. It was drawing closer again, the air thickening with every breath. I could feel it, hear it, its weight, the dragging of its limbs, like it was crawling closer to me. The air turned stale, and the smell of damp earth and decay filled my lungs. The shadows on the walls shifted, elongating and bending at impossible angles. They moved like liquid, sliding across the surfaces with unnatural fluidity, and I could swear I saw faces in them, twisted, distorted faces, eyes wide with fear, mouths open in silent screams. They were my own face. My own eyes, staring back at me, pleading with me to remember. Remember what? My mind screamed, but it was futile. There was nothing left but the cold grip of terror. You know what you've lost. The voice was closer now. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was right beside me. I could feel it pressing against my ear, too close, too real. The moments, the time, the pieces of you that are gone. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. The floor beneath me felt like it was giving way. The walls were closing in, bending and warping in impossible ways. The house, this house, was no longer familiar. It felt wrong, twisted, as if it had been reshaped by some invisible force, made to trap me in its distorted labyrinth. You can't escape, the voice repeated. But this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a command, a force that I could feel deep in my bones. I turned. Desperation clawed at me as I looked for an exit, for any way out of this nightmare. There was none. The room was a cage now. The door was gone. The windows were nothing but black voids, too deep to see through. I backed into the corner, my hands shaking, my mind scrambling to piece together fragments of memories, but it was useless. Nothing made sense anymore. Everything had fractured, the pieces slipping away like sand through my fingers. What happened to me? I thought, but it was a question I couldn't answer. I didn't even know how long I had been trapped in this place. Time had stopped making sense. Was it hours? Days? Or was it a lifetime? Suddenly, the darkness seemed to shift, and for the briefest moment, the room flickered. A light, a faint glow, just enough to make out shapes in the shadows, flashed in front of me. I squinted, my eyes desperate to focus, and then I saw it. Her. For a split second, there was a face in the darkness, faint and barely visible, but unmistakable. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror, and her mouth moved as if she was trying to speak. She knows, I thought, the realization crashing through me. She knows what happened. But before I could move closer, before I could even scream, the light vanished. The room was swallowed by darkness once again, and the creature was there. It was closer now. Closer than ever. She's gone. They're all gone, the voice hissed. You did this. You lost them. You lost everything. I dropped to my knees, the weight of the words sinking deep into my soul. Everything, everything I had lost. The creature, the shadow, was all around me now, pressing in, suffocating me, drowning me in its cold, unforgiving presence. It didn't matter that I couldn't see it clearly. I could feel it. It had always been there. And the more I struggled to remember, the more it consumed me. The more it took from me. You can't escape, the voice said again, louder this time, its echo filling my skull. You never will. And I knew, then, that it was true. There was no escaping this. There was no escaping the truth. The air was thick, like a blanket of ice suffocating me. I felt a tremor deep within my chest, my heart pounding erratically, as if it, too, was trying to escape. The shadows in the room had deepened, folding over themselves like layers of something wrong. The walls, once familiar, now seemed to bend unnaturally, as though the house itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with my panic. I could hear my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps, each one a desperate plea for something I couldn't even name. I had to get out. But the creature was all around me now. The very space I occupied felt like it had been swallowed whole by its presence. I could no longer tell where the shadows began and the creature ended. It was everywhere, its coldness, its darkness, its voice. You can't hide anymore. The voice was almost soothing now, a sharp contrast to the chaos in my mind. It felt like a thread, slowly unraveling everything I thought I knew, stretching and pulling apart my very soul. The whispers weren't just in my ears anymore, they were inside my thoughts, inside my head. You're trapped. There's no escape. They're all gone because of you. The words drilled into my skull, louder with every breath I took. It was a feeling I couldn't ignore, a gnawing certainty that something deep inside me was unraveling, like a thread being pulled from my chest. The room, the house, began to shift again. I blinked, and the familiar doorframe, the one I had thought was just a few steps away, seemed to stretch farther, warping as if it were made of rubber. No matter how fast I moved, the door was always out of reach. I staggered back, my mind spinning with disjointed fragments of images. Faces, familiar, yet distorted, flashed before my eyes. Her face. No, it was him, I couldn't be sure. They all blurred together, faces I couldn't place. They weren't people I recognized. They were memories, snippets from a life that had already slipped through my fingers. But something inside me told me they mattered. They were the pieces, the ones I had lost, the ones I couldn't remember but could feel. I have to remember, I thought desperately. I have to fight back. But when I tried to think, to grasp those fading images, the more they slipped away. It was like reaching into a dark fog, hoping to catch something solid. Instead, all I found was emptiness. There was nothing left to hold on to. Why do you keep running? The voice whispered. It was mocking now, playful, as though it found amusement in my suffering. You know what you've done. You know who you are. I stumbled, my back hitting the wall. I closed my eyes, trying to force the thoughts away. No, I can't remember. I can't face it. But the pressure was building, like a storm that couldn't be stopped, pushing and pulling at the very core of my mind. You think it's over, don't you? I snapped my eyes open. It wasn't just a voice anymore. There was something moving in the shadows, something alive. The darkness that had been lurking in the corners was now stretching forward, moving toward me. I could see it shift, thick, liquid shadows, writhing and coiling like serpents. And then, the shape, if it could even be called that, took form. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could recognize. It was a distortion, a nightmare carved out of my deepest fears, an amalgamation of everything I had been trying to escape. A long, skeletal hand reached from the shadows, the skin, or what I thought was skin, ripped and jagged, like paper being torn. The fingers were too long, too thin, the nails curling like claws that scraped against the floor as if hungry for something. The hand reached for me, slowly at first, but I could feel its cold, bitter touch crawling across my skin. It was as though the very air had turned to ice. I screamed, but no sound came. The grip was impossible to escape. It wasn't just physical. It was inside me now, deep in my soul. I felt my thoughts splinter, my body trembling as if it too were being pulled apart. I couldn't look away from the thing that was looming over me, its shape twisting, distorting with every passing second. "You did this to yourself," it whispered, its voice a jagged echo that tore at the edges of my sanity. "All of it. Every moment, every lost second, it's your fault." I didn't know what it was, what it wanted, or what it was even doing to me. But I knew one thing for certain, it had a hold on me. A hold I couldn't break. The terror was too deep. My mind wasn't mine anymore. My body was no longer mine. The creature had taken everything from me, piece by piece, until I was hollow. Empty. I struggled to breathe. The air was thick, saturated with something heavy, like the scent of decay, of rot. I looked down, but instead of the floor, I saw a reflection. It wasn't me. It was a face I didn't recognize, pale, bloodshot eyes staring back at me. And then, I saw it. The ring. The same one I had thrown away. The one that had been lost to time. But here it was, on the ground before me, as real as it had ever been. "You thought you could escape it, didn't you?" The voice, now more of a growl than a whisper, ripped through my mind. "But you never can. This is who you are." I bent down, reaching for the ring with trembling hands, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. The moment my skin touched it, a rush of memories slammed into me like a tidal wave. Faces, places, sounds, all of it came flooding back. I remembered her face, her smile, her laugh. I remembered him, the one who had been taken. I remembered what I had lost, what I had caused. But the moment I touched the ring, the room exploded into darkness. The creature was gone, but so was everything else. The house, the air, the memories. Everything dissolved, leaving me in a void, a place without form, without time. You can never forget. And then, nothing. It started with a question I couldn't ignore. A simple, unsettling question. Why do you feel like you're being watched? I stared at my phone. The screen glowed in the dim light of my apartment. I had just returned from a long day at work, the kind where your thoughts linger on everything you had to deal with, everything you had to ignore. The apartment felt oddly quiet, almost too quiet. The walls, the worn-out furniture, even the faint smell of pine from the cleaning supplies I had used that morning, they were all familiar. But something felt off. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the creeping unease that gnawed at my gut. It was probably just exhaustion. That was always the reason for the unsettling feelings. But then it came again. The phone buzzed once more, and that damn question flashed on the screen. I don't know why I looked at it again. Maybe I was hoping for something different. Maybe I wanted to know, needed to know. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. The call was from an unknown number. I should have ignored it. I always ignored calls from numbers I didn't recognize. But something inside me made me pick up. "Hello?" I answered, my voice thick with a mix of curiosity and caution. There was no immediate response, just silence. Then a soft click, and then the voice. A voice that didn't belong to anyone I knew. Why do you feel like you're being watched? I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The voice, low and muffled, but oddly familiar, echoed in my ears. It sent a chill through my spine. The question again. It wasn't just the question. It was the way it was asked. The way it pierced through my thoughts, as if it already knew the answer. I gripped the phone tighter, the screen now glowing too brightly against the growing darkness around me. Why do you feel like you're being watched? The words twisted in my mind like a knot tightening with every passing second. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on, suffocating. My breath quickened. I looked around the room, trying to convince myself that there was nothing to fear. Nothing had changed. Yet, it all felt wrong. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, everything felt louder now. More present. The air seemed heavier. I could almost feel eyes on me. I looked at the door. It was shut, just as it always was. But somehow, I felt it wasn't enough. I felt like there was something, or someone, just beyond that door, waiting. The voice returned, breaking my thoughts. Are you alone? It felt like the walls were closing in, the air thickening with an invisible pressure. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. My breath caught in my throat as I struggled to comprehend. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be. I opened my mouth to respond, but all that came out was a shaky breath. Then, the call ended. I stood there, my hands trembling, staring at the black screen of my phone. Silence followed. Absolute silence. But somehow, the quiet was louder than any noise. Was that even real? I wanted to believe it was a prank. A sick joke, maybe. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I turned away from the phone, trying to shake the feeling of eyes still on me. I wanted to do something, anything, to distract myself from the sudden, overpowering dread that had taken root inside me. I tried to focus on the mundane, the stack of dishes in the sink, the half-finished book on the table, the plants that needed watering. But none of it helped. It was like the whole apartment had become foreign, each object distorted, as though it wasn't supposed to be there. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, of something lurking just outside my vision. I glanced out the window. The streets below were empty, silent. But I didn't feel any better. A sudden, faint noise broke the stillness. A sound from deep within the apartment. It was so soft I almost missed it, the softest shuffle, like something dragging across the floor. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't dare to move. My heart raced, the sound now amplified in the silence of the room. I strained my ears, trying to catch it again. Nothing. I exhaled, trying to calm myself, telling myself it was just the house settling. But my body remained tense, every muscle frozen. And then it came again. A single, soft step. I didn't dare look. I couldn't bring myself to. My thoughts were spinning in a frenzy, but one question kept returning. Why do you feel like you're being watched? And suddenly, it all clicked. That voice on the phone wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. It knew something. It knew something about me. And that thought was enough to make my skin crawl. I slowly turned toward the hallway, my eyes scanning the shadows. Every inch of the space that had once felt safe now felt suffocating. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I stood frozen in the dimly lit room, staring into the hallway as if something might suddenly appear from the shadows. The feeling that I wasn't alone, that presence, was suffocating. I wanted to move, to check, to do something, but my body refused to cooperate. The silence dragged on, stretching the seconds into what felt like an eternity. That soft, almost imperceptible shuffle was still echoing in my ears, even though there was nothing in sight. It could have been the house settling. It could have been a breeze pushing something across the floor. But why did it feel like it was waiting for me? Why did I feel like I was being drawn into something I couldn't see but could feel pressing against me? I forced myself to take a step forward, each footfall muffled against the old, creaky wooden floor. I reached out with trembling hands and turned on the lamp near the hallway. The dim light barely stretched past the edge of the room, but it was enough to ease the edge of my panic just for a moment. It's nothing, I thought to myself. Nothing at all. But even as I reassured myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I scanned the hallway, looking for any signs of movement, any shadow that seemed to linger a little too long. There was nothing. No sound. No shape. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing. I glanced back toward the phone, still sitting on the coffee table where I had left it. The screen was black now, but that last call, it still haunted me. The voice. The question. Why do you feel like you're being watched? It had cut through my mind like a knife, digging deeper with every passing second. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of the thought. That's when I heard it again. This time, the sound wasn't so faint. It was unmistakable, a step. One step. I felt my blood run cold. It was behind me. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, to confront whatever was there. But I couldn't. I couldn't move. I stood rooted to the spot, waiting for the inevitable. Every second felt like an hour. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of the call, the voice, the question. How could it know? I needed to leave. I needed to get out. But my feet felt glued to the floor. Suddenly, a sharp click echoed from behind me. The unmistakable sound of a door opening. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway behind me was empty. The door to the bathroom was ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond it. The light from the lamp barely touched the edge of the doorframe. My breath caught in my throat. I could have sworn it had been closed before. With my pulse racing, I slowly took a few tentative steps toward the bathroom. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to turn away. But I was compelled to look. I reached out and nudged the door open further, the faintest creak of the hinges sending a ripple of tension through the air. It was dark inside. So dark that I could barely make out the outline of the sink, the toilet, the faint glint of the mirror on the far wall. Nothing was moving. Nothing was there. But something was off. There was a smell. A faint, metallic scent, almost like copper. It clung to the air, thick and oppressive. I stepped inside, my footfall muffled on the cold tile floor. The light from the hallway barely illuminated the far corner, but it was enough for me to notice something on the floor. A small, dark smear. Blood? I wasn't sure. It didn't look fresh, but it didn't look right either. I took another step forward, my body moving against every instinct telling me to run. As I moved closer, I noticed something else. In the mirror. There, in the reflection, standing in the corner of the room, was a figure. It was faint, barely visible, just a shadow really. But it was there. I could see it. Who was that? My breath hitched as my eyes widened. I spun around, but the room was empty. Nothing. My pulse was a loud, thudding drumbeat in my ears as I stumbled backward. I didn't know what I had seen or hadn't seen, but it didn't matter. I had to leave. Now. I turned and bolted from the bathroom back toward the living room, but then something stopped me in my tracks. The phone. The phone that had been sitting innocently on the table, it was gone. I stared at the empty spot where it had been, my heart sinking. There was no way it had just disappeared. I hadn't moved it. No one else was here. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, the oppressive feeling of being watched returning with full force. I turned slowly, scanning the room, my breath shallow and quick. There it was. The phone was lying on the floor, just at the edge of the hallway. But the screen was cracked now, spiderwebbed and broken. I moved toward it, my hand shaking as I knelt to pick it up. The moment my fingers brushed the screen, a faint buzz vibrated through the device. I held it up, expecting to see a new notification, but there was nothing. Just that cracked screen, glowing dimly. And then the voice came again. Why do you feel like you're being watched? It was closer this time. The voice sounded different. More distinct. More present. I looked around the room, searching for the source, but there was nothing. Only shadows. Only the sound of my breathing. And then I heard it again. A step. A footfall, slow and deliberate. It was coming from behind me. I didn't wait. I bolted for the door, my body propelled by sheer terror. The darkness behind me seemed to grow, pressing in on me, chasing me with each step. The door was right there, just a few feet away. But the air in front of me thickened. Someone was blocking the way. I reached out, desperate to escape, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked. I turned around, my eyes darting frantically, but there was no escape. Only the voice. Why do you feel like you're being watched? The room seemed to close in on me, the air growing thick and stifling as if the walls were pressing together. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, each one more ragged than the last. I tried the door again, frantic now, pulling on the handle with all the strength I could muster. But it was locked from the inside. No, no, no! My heart thudded in my chest as I turned back toward the room, the shadows now dancing around me like twisted figures in the corners of my vision. There was something in here with me. I could feel it. It was closer than before. A soft rustling noise came from behind me. The kind of sound you hear when someone shifts their weight, the subtle scrape of fabric against skin. I spun around so quickly I nearly stumbled, but there was nothing there. Just the dim light of the hallway creeping in through the crack of the door, casting strange, elongated shadows on the walls. The voice came again, and this time it was so clear, so loud, it felt as if it were inside my head. Why do you feel like you're being watched? I froze. It was as if the words were carved into my very soul, etching themselves deep into my thoughts. The voice, cold, hollow, felt all too real, like a presence I couldn't escape. But where was it coming from? I grabbed at the phone in my hand, feeling the smooth, cracked surface beneath my fingers, almost as if it were pulsing with a life of its own. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling over it as I desperately tried to make sense of it all. Maybe if I could just find a way to call for help, to reach someone, anyone. The screen flickered. I blinked, confused. It had been black just seconds ago, but now the display was showing something. A number. I couldn't read it at first. My vision blurred from the adrenaline, but then I realized with growing horror that it was my number. The screen shifted again, the digits flashing one by one. They were forming a message. Help me. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. There was no way. The phone was cracked, the battery nearly dead, and yet the message was there. It was impossible. I staggered back, my legs trembling, and tried to shake the feeling of dread that was crawling under my skin. But the more I focused on the phone, the more it felt as if the walls were closing in. It was like the room itself had taken on a life of its own, pulsating with energy, with something dark that I couldn't explain. Was it real? A loud bang broke my train of thought. I whirled around, heart racing. The sound had come from the other side of the room. The far corner, where the shadows seemed the darkest. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the eyes on me, those unseen eyes, watching from every direction, as though the darkness itself was alive and aware of my every move. I took a step forward, my instincts screaming at me to turn and run, but my body was frozen. The room seemed to tilt, and I felt a strange dizziness overcome me. The walls began to warp, bending and distorting like melted wax. This isn't real. This can't be real. I was breathing too quickly now, each breath shallow and erratic. The room felt suffocating, as though I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape. Then, something shifted. A form. It was in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the dim light. At first, it was nothing more than a vague silhouette, but as I stared, it began to take shape. A figure, tall, thin, unnatural. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. It can't be real, I repeated to myself over and over. But the figure moved. Slowly. Purposefully. I stumbled backward, my mind racing, but my body wouldn't obey. The figure reached out, its long, spindly arms stretching toward me. This isn't happening. But it was. It was happening. It was real. The voice came again, echoing through the room, inside my head, filling every space. Why do you feel like you're being watched? And then, for the first time, I saw its face. It was pale, too pale, so white it seemed to shimmer under the low light. The features were distorted, not quite human. The eyes were the worst part, dark, hollow, with no light, no life. Just emptiness. It felt like it was looking straight through me, as if it knew everything I had ever done, everything I had ever thought. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice was gone. The terror that gripped me was choking, suffocating me, pressing down on my chest with an unbearable weight. The thing in front of me reached out again, its fingers stretching impossibly long, the skin tight and unnatural, like it was made of something other than flesh. It touched my arm, and I screamed. Finally, a sound broke free, but it was a silent scream, a scream that no one would ever hear. The room spun as the figure's presence grew heavier, closer. I could feel the coldness of its touch crawling under my skin, invading my body, my mind. The phone in my hand vibrated again. A new message. Let me in. My hand shook as I looked down at the screen. The message wasn't from anyone I knew. It was from that number. The unknown number. the one that had been haunting me since the first call. My mind swirled with panic, with confusion. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My vision blurred, and all I could hear was the voice, louder now. Closer. And then, a loud crack. The door. The lock broke free, and the door flung open, sending a rush of cold air into the room. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. Silent. I didn't wait to see if it would follow me. I bolted for the door, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. My feet barely touched the ground as I ran, my legs carrying me as fast as they could. But the moment I crossed the threshold and stepped into the hallway, I felt the chill fade. The pressure, the presence, it was gone. For a moment, I thought I was free. But the sound of my phone buzzing in my pocket cut through the silence. No. No, no. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to answer. But I knew I had to. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone. The screen flashed to life, the message there, waiting. I'm not done with you yet. The door slammed shut behind me, and I turned to find the hallway empty. But I could still feel it. The voice. It was inside my head. And I was being watched. The hallway stretched before me, dark and quiet. For a moment, I thought maybe I had escaped it. The oppressive weight, the coldness that had filled the room, the presence, it seemed to have dissipated the moment I left the cursed space. But the sense of dread still lingered, clinging to my skin, suffocating the air around me. The phone buzzed again in my hand, a harsh, mechanical sound that sliced through the silence. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to see what it said. But I knew I had no choice. I lifted the phone slowly, my hands trembling, and swiped across the cracked screen. I see you. I froze. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just the words. It was the feeling, the unmistakable, suffocating feeling that I wasn't alone. Not here. Not anymore. I glanced around, but the hallway was empty. No shadows flickered, no footsteps echoed in the distance. It was just the usual emptiness of the house, the kind I had grown used to over the years. But now, it felt different. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air thick with something unspoken. It was as if the house itself was aware of my fear. Another buzz. I couldn't look away this time. My eyes locked on the phone, drawn to it against my will, my fingers gripping the device so tightly I thought it might crack further in my hands. I'm here. My stomach churned. I spun around, looking for any sign of life, anything that could explain the fear crawling under my skin. The hallway was still empty, the same as it had always been. But the feeling, it was like being watched from every angle. Like eyes were pressing into the back of my skull, invisible, relentless. I took a few shaky steps forward, my feet dragging as I fought the urge to run. I couldn't explain it. I had to find some way to stop this, to make it go away, to prove to myself that none of it was real. The phone buzzed again. Don't look behind you. I felt my blood run cold. I couldn't help it. My head turned, as if it was on its own. The air around me seemed to thicken, each breath more labored than the last. Nothing but the empty darkness behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. That it was waiting. Watching. Suddenly, the phone screen blinked, flashing wildly. The text changed again. You know where I am. My pulse quickened and the blood drained from my face. I gripped the phone harder, my mind spinning. What did that mean? What was happening? Was this a prank? Or something worse? Something I didn't understand? The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a creeping chill swept through the hallway, colder than anything I had felt before. It wasn't the kind of cold that came with winter. This was deeper, darker. It seemed to sink into my bones. Then, the whisper. A voice. It came from the shadows at the end of the hall, so faint I almost missed it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, the house settling. But then, I heard it again. Clearer this time. You can't hide from me. I spun around, my breath caught in my throat. The hallway seemed to stretch out impossibly far, the walls closing in on me like a trap. The darkness at the end of the hall wasn't just the absence of light anymore. It felt like something was there, moving, something watching me. I had to get out. I had to leave. My feet carried me faster than I thought possible, as if my body was moving on pure instinct. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was just running, driven by a single thought, escape. I reached the front door, my hand reaching out for the knob. The handle was cold to the touch, too cold. The door should have been locked, it was always locked, but now it turned easily in my grasp. I swung the door open. The air outside felt like a breath of fresh air after being suffocated. But even then, I could feel it. That presence. It was like a weight that followed me, pressing down on my every step, lingering even in the open air. I stepped outside onto the porch, but something made me stop. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. A noise. Soft at first. Faint. Then louder. Closer. It was coming from the yard, from the shadows just beyond the edge of the porch light. I turned toward the sound, my heart racing as my eyes desperately searched the darkness. At first, it was just the rustling of the wind in the trees. Then, I saw it. A figure. It wasn't human. It couldn't have been. The silhouette was tall, impossibly tall, its form shifting and writhing in a way that defied the logic of the world around me. It didn't move like a person. It moved like something else, something wrong. It was at the edge of the yard, standing just beyond the reach of the light. I couldn't see its face, thankfully, but I could feel its eyes on me. They were there, watching. Always watching. And then it spoke. You can't leave. The voice was hollow, like it had no substance, no warmth. It echoed through the air around me, a terrible sound that seemed to rattle my very bones. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My legs were rooted to the ground, paralyzed by fear. The figure took a step forward, its form becoming clearer in the dim light. And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't just watching me. It was waiting for something. Waiting for me to make a choice. I stood frozen on the porch, my body trembling, my mind screaming for me to move, but the fear had locked me in place. The figure in the yard, the one that wasn't human, took another step toward me. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as though it had all the time in the world to torment me. My breath was shallow, my pulse erratic. I couldn't look away from it, because the longer I did, the more it seemed to pull me in. The shape, the figure, was becoming clearer with every second, but not in a way that made me feel safe. No. The more I saw, the more I realized I didn't want to know what it really looked like. Its body was tall, far too tall to be human, with limbs that seemed stretched out unnaturally long, like they had been pulled and warped. The darkness around it seemed to cling to it, a living shadow that made the air itself feel thick, suffocating. The more I focused on it, the more the world around me began to blur and distort, as though the very space I was standing in didn't want to hold its shape anymore. And still, its eyes, they were the worst part. I could feel them on me, piercing into my very soul, and yet I couldn't see them clearly. It was as if they were both there and not there at the same time. Hollow. Black. Empty. The silence that hung between us was deafening. Even the sounds of the night, the usual chirps and rustles of the wind, had stopped. The world had fallen completely still, as if it, too, was waiting for something. For a moment, I thought it might speak again, but it didn't. The only sound I could hear was the pounding of my own heart in my ears, so loud it felt like the world was closing in around me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body wouldn't listen. It was as if the figure had put me in some kind of trance, locking me in place. And then it moved again. This time, it didn't just take a step. It lunged. I gasped and finally managed to move, staggering backward, almost tripping over the steps as I tried to retreat into the house. My hand fumbled for the door handle, but before I could reach it, I felt something cold, icy cold, brush against my neck. I whipped around, terrified, but the figure was still standing at the edge of the yard, not advancing, but somehow closer. The space between us had shrunk, impossibly. I couldn't explain how, but it was like it was always just one step ahead of me, pulling me closer to it. "You will stay," it said, its voice chilling and unnatural, like it was speaking from some deep, dark abyss. My throat tightened. The words it spoke, the command it gave me, were more than just threats. There was power in them. And I felt that power sinking deep into my chest, suffocating me. I turned again, my breath catching in my throat, and finally grasped the door handle, wrenching it open. I didn't think, didn't hesitate, I just bolted inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it without even looking, hands shaking uncontrollably as I tried to steady my breath. But the house was no better. No safer. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The pressure, the weight, the presence. It was inside now, too. The walls seemed to close in on me, the air growing thicker, heavier, like I was walking through wet cement. The lights flickered above me, casting the house into eerie shadows that moved of their own accord, as if the very structure was alive and aware. I backed away, stumbling into the living room, but the floorboards creaked underfoot, too loud, too distinct. The house was reacting to me. Watching me. The feeling I had outside, the one that told me I was being hunted, was here, too. But now, it was worse. Inside, the silence was all-consuming, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The phone buzzed again. I stared at it, still in my hand, still vibrating with that unnatural urgency. My mind screamed for me to drop it, to ignore it, but I couldn't. I had to know. I looked at the screen. "You're never safe." A chill ran through me, far colder than the one I had felt outside. I could feel it now, crawling up my spine, threading through my veins like ice. It was here. It had followed me inside. The house was no longer just a place of refuge, it had become part of the nightmare. I turned to face the room, looking at the dark corners where the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. The lamp beside me flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. But in the periphery of my vision, I saw something else. A shape, standing just at the edge of the light. Not quite human, not quite anything I could recognize. It moved, slow, deliberate, like it was stalking me. It had no eyes. Just a gaping, endless darkness where a face should have been. I took a step back, my breath trembling in my chest. The figure in the shadows didn't move. It just stood there, as though it was waiting for something. The phone buzzed again. "Don't go." I didn't think. I ran. I bolted for the stairs, my feet pounding on the floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The darkness behind me seemed to stretch and claw at my heels. The house, the place I had lived in for so many years, was no longer familiar. The walls seemed to pulse with a rhythm I couldn't understand, and the shadows grew thicker the further I went. I reached the top of the stairs, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear, but I didn't stop. I kept running, toward my room, toward the only place I thought might be safe. But when I reached the door, I stopped cold. The door was ajar. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. I reached out a shaking hand, but the moment my fingers brushed the handle, I heard it. The whisper. A voice, so soft, so faint, that I almost thought I had imagined it. "I'm already inside." I froze. The door creaked open, and behind it, standing in the middle of my room, was the same figure from outside. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was fully formed, standing in my space, in my reality. It had crossed the threshold, and there was no escaping it now. My vision blurred, my knees buckled beneath me, and the last thing I saw before I collapsed to the floor was the figure's long, gnarled hand reaching toward me. And I knew, in that moment, it was never going to let me go. Have you ever woken up, sure that the nightmare you just escaped was real? I asked myself that question every night, even though I knew the answer. It was always the same, yes. But what terrified me the most wasn't the dreams themselves, it was the sense that they were bleeding into reality. My name is Daniel, and I've been living with this constant unease for months now. It started with the dreams. At first, they were just typical bad dreams. The kind that make you wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, but nothing out of the ordinary. But then, the dreams became too real. They didn't fade when I woke up. The feeling stayed with me, lingered long after the nightmare had ended, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I live alone in a small apartment on the second floor of an old building. It's a quiet place, away from the chaos of the city, and I like it that way. But lately, the silence has been suffocating. The walls, once comforting, now feel like they're closing in on me. The dreams always start the same way, an empty house, dark and hollow, with only the sound of my footsteps echoing. Then, the whispers begin. They're faint at first, barely noticeable, but they grow louder as I walk through the empty hallways. I know they're not real. I know it. But when I try to wake up, I can't. I'm trapped in that house, hearing the voices, seeing the shadows, but unable to escape. And just when I think it's over, something touches me. That's when I wake up, always gasping for air, heart pounding. But tonight, something is different. I'm in my bed, my body tangled in the sheets, but I don't feel the usual rush of fear after waking up. Instead, I feel watched. I try to brush it off. It's probably just my mind playing tricks on me again. But the feeling doesn't go away. I sit up, eyes scanning the room. The clock on the nightstand reads 2:17 a.m., the numbers glowing faintly in the darkness. Everything is still. too still. I listen closely, straining to hear any sound. Nothing. The silence is oppressive, like it's waiting for something. Then, I hear it. A faint scratching sound coming from the closet. I freeze, my heart skipping a beat. The closet door is cracked open just a little, the darkness inside swallowing up any trace of light. I can't explain it, but something about that sound, the soft, rhythmic scratching, sends a wave of unease through me. I sit there, motionless, unsure whether to move or wait. The sound continues, growing louder with each passing second, like something or someone is trying to break free from inside the closet. My mind races. I know I should get up, investigate, but I'm paralyzed by the fear that if I move, whatever is in that closet will notice me. The scratching stops suddenly. For a moment, there is nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the suffocating silence. Then, it comes again. A soft thud. Not from the closet this time, but from behind me. I whip around, eyes wide, breath shallow. The room is still, but the feeling of being watched has only grown stronger. My pulse quickens. Something isn't right. I can feel it, like the air around me has thickened, like the shadows have started moving, creeping just beyond my line of sight. I stand up, my legs shaking, and take a step toward the closet. But as soon as I do, I hear the sound again, a low, guttural growl that seems to come from the very walls themselves. No, this isn't real. It can't be. I stumble backward, my mind fighting to stay in control. My fingers brush the nightstand, and I grab my phone, almost dropping it in my panic. I check the time again. 2:18 a.m. I blink. That wasn't possible. I was just looking at the clock moments ago. It read 2:17 a.m. Now, it's 1 minute later. My heart begins to race as the scratching sound grows louder, the growl reverberating through the walls. The room is growing colder, too, the temperature dropping rapidly. I can see my breath now, thin and white in the air. This isn't a dream. This is happening. This is real. I turn back toward the closet, my hands trembling, and reach for the door. But as my fingers touch the handle, I freeze. I can feel something on the other side. Something waiting. And that's when I hear it again. The whisper. It's soft at first, like a distant murmur, but then it grows louder, clearer. You can't hide. I pull my hand away from the door as if it's been burned, my body trembling uncontrollably. The whispering continues, becoming louder, more urgent. I can't make out the words, but I can feel the malicious intent behind them. I stumble backward, unable to tear my eyes away from the closet. I'm shaking now, my mind screaming at me to leave, to run, but my legs won't move. I'm paralyzed by fear. Then, suddenly, everything goes still. The whispers stop. The scratching stops. The growling stops. The temperature seems to level out, and I can't hear anything but the pounding of my heart. Why isn't it happening anymore? I think to myself, but the question doesn't make sense. I start to breathe again, trying to calm myself down. My eyes stay fixed on the closet door, unwilling to break contact. The silence stretches on. And then, without warning, the door to the closet swings open on its own. It's empty. But the feeling doesn't leave. I can feel it, the presence. It's still here. I step toward the open door cautiously, my breath shallow, and peer inside. The darkness is absolute, a void that seems to swallow the very light from the room. My eyes scan the shelves and the floor. There's nothing there. Nothing except. I blink. A single object, small and out of place, lies on the floor at the far corner of the closet. A broken mirror shard. The realization hits me like a ton of bricks. The object looks familiar. Too familiar. It's from a nightmare I had weeks ago, the same one where I saw my reflection shattered, pieces scattered across the floor. I remember seeing the sharp edges, the jagged lines. The mirror. The closet. The whispers. I back away from the door, my breath quickening. No. This can't be happening. And then I hear it once more. A voice, soft, like a breath in the dark. I'm not finished with you yet. I freeze, unable to move. The shadows in the room begin to shift. The nightmare has just begun. I can't breathe. It feels as though the air itself is suffocating me, closing in from all sides. My heartbeat is so loud, I'm sure whatever is in the room can hear it. I don't know how long I've been standing there, staring at that broken mirror shard on the floor, but it feels like an eternity. I'm not finished with you yet. The voice is still fresh in my mind, like an echo that refuses to fade. I want to run, to escape, but my legs feel like lead, my feet glued to the floor. The shadows in the room are shifting again, flickering in ways they shouldn't, stretching unnaturally across the walls. My eyes dart to the closet door, which is now fully open, revealing nothing but the darkness beyond. But I know that's a lie. There's something in there. Something that's been waiting for me. My mind races. Why is this happening? What do I do now? Should I scream? Should I call for help? But I know no one would hear me. No one ever does. I glance at my phone. It's still in my hand, the screen lighting up briefly with the time, 2:22 a.m. Again, that unsettling shift in time. I don't remember looking at it before. I was just checking it a second ago. Wasn't I? I shake my head, trying to clear the fog that's clouding my thoughts. I have to stay calm. I have to think. But it's hard to think when the walls feel like they're pressing in on me and the whispers have started again. Only this time, they're not coming from the closet. They're coming from everywhere. I hear them, faint and fragmented, skittering in and out of my perception. The voices are disjointed, barely recognizable, but their tone is unmistakable, low, urgent, full of malice. They slither through the air like tendrils, reaching for me, wrapping around my mind. I squeeze my eyes shut, trying to block out the sound, but it's impossible. It's all I can hear, louder now, swirling around me, each voice layering over the other. You can't escape. It's already too late. You've been marked. I open my eyes, desperate to find something, anything, to ground me. The room is dim, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long, stretched shadows across the walls. The shadows are wrong, though. They don't look like normal shadows. They're too thick, too solid, moving against the direction of the light, creeping closer to me, inching across the floor. I take a step backward, my legs unsteady, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I can feel something cold at the back of my neck, like a hand is hovering just behind me, waiting to touch me. The air feels thicker now, almost sticky, pressing against my skin, making it hard to move. The whispers are growing louder, and the shadows, are stretching toward me, reaching for me. I need to get out of here. I need to leave this apartment, leave everything behind. But where would I go? The streets are just as dark, just as silent, and the feeling of being watched would follow me no matter where I ran. I can't stay here. With a trembling hand, I grab the door handle of the apartment and yank it open. The hallway outside is dimly lit, the old floorboards creaking under my weight. But the moment I step into the hallway, the door slams shut behind me with a deafening bang. I jump, my heart leaping into my throat. I don't turn around. I can't. I know that if I look back, I'll see something that will make my blood run cold. I feel it. Whatever it is, it's there. I don't need to see it to know. But then, I hear something else. Something new. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing down the hall, coming closer and closer. They're too heavy to be my own. And they're not just in the hallway, they're inside my head, too, like the sound is vibrating in my skull. I turn too quickly, and my shoulder hits the wall with a dull thud. The air feels colder now, and I realize I can see my breath, faint puffs of white mist hanging in the air. I want to scream, but I can't. My voice is trapped inside, lodged in my throat, too terrified to escape. The footsteps are closer now. I don't know what's out there, but I know one thing for sure, it's coming for me. I start running, my feet stumbling over the old carpet, my legs barely keeping up with my frantic pace. I don't know where I'm going. I don't care. I just need to get away. But the footsteps keep pace with me, keeping just the right distance. Never too far, never too close. It's as if whatever it is playing a game with me, savoring the terror that's flooding my body, every breath I take, every step I make. I round the corner, my heart hammering in my chest, and then I stop dead in my tracks. At the end of the hallway, standing in the shadows, is a figure. It's tall, unnaturally so, its form barely visible in the dim light. But I can see enough. I can see its outline, too thin, too elongated. Its head is bent at an odd angle, almost as if it's looking at me from a place I can't see, like its eyes are too far up. I can't make out any features, but I can feel its gaze on me, like eyes crawling along my spine. For a moment, time seems to slow, and I'm frozen in place, my body refusing to move, my breath stuck in my chest. The air feels like it's thickening around me again, suffocating me. Then, the figure steps forward. It doesn't move like a person. It glides, its feet not quite touching the floor, hovering above it. The shadows around it seem to ripple and bend, almost as if it's pulling them toward it, consuming the light. I can't move. I can't breathe. My heart is pounding so loudly now that I'm sure it's all I can hear. But the footsteps, the whispers, they're gone. All I can hear now is that low, eerie sound, like the very walls of the building are groaning under the weight of something ancient, something unnatural. The figure takes another step toward me, and I can feel it, the weight of its presence, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I have to run. I turn, but before I can take a step, I hear a voice, its voice, too clear in the silence of the hallway. You can't escape. The words cut through the air, cold and final. And just like that, the hallway goes dark. I scream. I'm still screaming, my throat raw, but no sound escapes. It's as if the very air has been swallowed up, leaving only a suffocating silence. My eyes are wide, struggling to adjust to the pitch-black darkness that has swallowed the hallway. The figure, the thing in the shadows, has disappeared, but the fear it left behind lingers, crawling under my skin. I can't breathe. I can't think. My body feels frozen, a part of me trapped in this black void. But then, I hear it again, the faintest whisper, like the brush of a feather against my ear. My pulse spikes. You can't escape. The voice is closer now, a strange, twisted melody that seems to come from all directions at once. My hands tremble uncontrollably as I reach for my phone, but when I press the screen, the light flashes only once before fading. I hold it up, hoping for something, anything, to pierce through the dark. Nothing. The screen stays black. I have to get out. I don't care where I go. I don't care what happens. I just need to leave. The hallway feels longer now, like it's stretching endlessly before me, the walls narrowing in, closing in. I can feel it, something is wrong. Not just the shadows or the air, but something deeper, something I can't quite understand, but I can feel it crawling in my chest. I shouldn't have left my apartment. But the moment the thought comes to me, I push it aside. I can't afford to think about that now. I need to focus. I need to move. But the darkness, the heavy darkness, it's swallowing the light from my phone, inch by inch. I take a step forward, but my feet feel unsteady, like I'm walking in a dream, each movement a struggle against invisible forces. And then, there's the sound. A slow, deliberate scraping noise, coming from somewhere behind me. It's a faint, eerie sound, like metal on stone, dragging through the silence. My heart skips a beat. I force myself to turn. I can barely see anything, just the vague outline of the hallway stretching before me, the door to my apartment far off in the distance. But that scraping sound, it's louder now. It's closer. My breath quickens. It's coming. I know it is. I turn again, my legs burning with the effort, and I push forward. Each step feels like it takes forever, like I'm moving through molasses. The scraping is relentless, following me, always one step behind. The fear in my chest grows, spreading like fire, until it consumes everything. I know what I'm running from. I know what's behind me. It's the thing in the hallway. The thing that follows me in the dark, watching me from the shadows. I glance over my shoulder, just for a second. And there it is. The figure is back, but this time, I see it clearly. It's tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long and thin, stretching unnaturally as it glides toward me. The light from my phone barely touches its form, but I can see enough. The skin on its face, if it even has a face, is stretched tight, its features barely there, just a blur of dark emptiness. But the worst part is its eyes. I don't even think they're eyes. There are two black holes in its face, like a bottomless pit, absorbing everything they touch. It moves slowly, but it doesn't need to rush. It knows it has all the time in the world. You can't escape. I hear the whisper again, but this time it's louder. It's right in my ear, its breath cold against my skin, and I feel my skin crawl in response. I can't move. I can't escape. I try to scream, but no sound comes out. My throat tightens, like something is choking me from the inside. The darkness around me thickens, presses in like hands gripping my chest, and I feel like I'm going to suffocate. The figure takes another step forward. I can feel its presence, feel it in my bones, in my teeth, in the very air I breathe. I feel it inside me now, a cold, dark presence swirling around my thoughts, squeezing my heart. I can feel its reach, like it's pulling me toward it, pulling my very soul into the blackness. I take a step back, but my foot slips and I stumble. My legs give out and I crash to the floor. The scraping sound is closer now, and I hear the low growl of the figure as it moves, its steps too deliberate, too precise. It's close, too close. I try to push myself up, but my body won't cooperate. My arms feel weak, my chest heavy. I can't breathe. I can't think. The air feels colder now, a freezing gust of wind that cuts through me, numbing me to the core. My body trembles uncontrollably, but it's not from the cold. It's fear. The figure is standing above me now. I can feel it. I close my eyes, pressing my hands to my ears, hoping, praying for it to stop. But the voice that's inside my head, that's inside my soul, it doesn't stop. You can't escape. The world around me blurs, the darkness closing in, wrapping itself around me, and I can feel my body slipping away. I don't know if I'm falling or if I've already fallen. I don't know if this is real. But I know one thing for sure. I can't escape. And I know, in that moment, that I'm never going to get out of here. The figure's hand, its thin, cold fingers, brush against my skin, and everything goes black. The darkness is suffocating. I try to scream, but nothing comes out. My mouth is dry, like I've swallowed sand. The pressure in my chest is unbearable, but I can't move. It's as if my body has been paralyzed, frozen in place by the overwhelming cold. Every inch of me aches, every breath I take feels like I'm inhaling shards of glass. I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. But I know one thing, I'm still here. Still alive, or at least, still existing in some twisted way. The blackness around me is thick, like ink spilling across the edges of my vision. I can't see my hands, can't feel my legs, can't hear anything except the pounding of my own heart. The silence is deafening, but it's not peaceful. It's suffocating, crushing me from all sides. I try to move my fingers. They twitch, then still again. The cold is seeping into my bones, but there's something else, something far worse. I can feel it, something, crawling beneath my skin, writhing inside my chest, slowly taking over every part of me. Then, out of the silence, a faint sound. A scraping. I flinch, the sound too familiar. It's not just any sound, it's the sound from the hallway, the sound that followed me. I can feel my heart stop. I'm not alone. The scraping comes again, louder this time, but it's not coming from the hallway anymore. It's coming from inside the dark space I'm trapped in. From all around me. I want to move. I want to run, to escape, but I can't. I try to open my eyes wider, to see what's around me, but it's no use. It's as if the darkness is swallowing my sight, leaving me blind. The scraping noise is joined by something else now, soft whispers, voices that slither through the black like serpents, curling into my ears. You're not alone. The voice is clear now, too clear, too real. My body shakes as the words sink in. I wish I could cover my ears, but my hands are still frozen at my sides. My mind is racing, thoughts spinning in 1,000 directions, trying to make sense of this nightmare. But it's not just a nightmare. It's real. You can't escape. It's the same voice. The same cold, hollow whisper that lingers in the edges of my mind. I close my eyes, but it doesn't stop. The darkness presses in closer, like it's breathing around me, moving in waves, slowly closing the distance between us. You belong to us now. The voice laughs, a soft, unnerving sound that sends a shiver down my spine. I feel it vibrating in my bones, deep in my soul. I don't know who this is, but I know that I don't want to be a part of it. A gust of wind blows through the black, and the whispers grow louder, more urgent. They're all around me now, buzzing in my ears like a swarm of insects. The air smells foul, like something rotten, and I can taste it in my mouth, bitter and thick. My breath catches in my throat, but I can't breathe it out. It's as if the very air is choking me, pulling me deeper into this suffocating void. I try to scream again. Still nothing. My throat feels tight, constricted. You're ours. I hear the scraping again, this time closer, right next to me. My body jerks, my muscles finally able to respond to the terror surging through me. I try to sit up, but my body refuses to cooperate. It's as though my limbs are made of lead, too heavy to move. I push with all my strength, forcing myself to sit upright, my heart hammering in my chest. And then, I see it. A shape. A silhouette, barely discernible in the dark. It's standing there, just beyond the reach of my sight, but I can feel it. I can feel it watching me, studying me like prey. My breath hitches as the shape moves, its presence drawing closer. You can't hide. I want to scream. I want to run. But I can't. I'm trapped. Trapped in this nightmare, trapped in this suffocating dark. The scraping sound is louder now, almost deafening. It's no longer just a noise, it's a presence, an unmistakable force moving through the space around me, circling me like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. I close my eyes, holding my breath, hoping, praying that it's all a dream, that I'll wake up any second. But the voice continues to whisper, the scraping gets louder, closer, and I can feel the coldness wrapping itself around me. And then, just as I think I can't take it anymore, it stops. The whispers, the scraping, everything. For one brief, fleeting moment, there is nothing. But that silence is worse. It presses down on me, like a weight I can't escape. My heart pounds louder than before, deafening, drowning out the emptiness around me. Please, just let me wake up. I want to move. I want to feel the ground beneath me, the walls, something, anything to prove that this isn't real. But before I can even attempt to move, I hear it again. The scraping. It's coming from right behind me. I don't dare turn around. I don't want to see what's there. But I have no choice. I have to look. And when I do, I can't believe what I see. The figure is standing right behind me. But it's not just standing. It's grinning. The grin is impossible to ignore. It stretches wider than humanly possible, too wide, too unnatural. Its mouth is open, revealing jagged, broken teeth that glisten in the dim light of the void. I feel the air grow colder, the very temperature around me dropping to a point where my skin aches, as though the chill is seeping into my bones. But it's not the cold that terrifies me. It's the eyes. Two black voids, hollow, empty, and yet they're watching me. They don't blink. They don't move. They just stare. And I feel it, something deep within me trembling at the sheer emptiness of their gaze. It's as though this thing, this creature, is not looking at me as a person, but as something insignificant. Like I'm merely an object to be toyed with. The longer I stare into those black holes, the more I feel like I'm losing myself, like part of my soul is being drawn into those depths. I try to move, to back away, but my body betrays me. It's like my limbs are made of stone, too heavy to lift. My heart races in my chest, my breath coming in short, panic gasps. I can't breathe. I can't get away. The figure leans in closer, its grin widening further. I feel its cold breath against the back of my neck. It smells foul, like rot and decay, like something that hasn't been alive in years. The sharp, rasping sound of its breathing fills the air, each inhalation like a slow, deliberate pull. Then the scraping returns. This time, it's more than just a sound. It's a physical sensation. The floor beneath me groans, the walls tremble. I feel the vibrations in my chest as if something is crawling beneath the surface of the earth itself, something enormous, something ancient. The scraping grows louder, more frantic, like claws against the stone of an unbreakable prison. I try to scream, but again, nothing comes out. My throat is too tight, constricted by fear. I can feel the weight of its presence pressing against me, suffocating me, but I still can't move. The air is thick, impossible to inhale. I feel like I'm drowning in it, every breath a struggle against the crushing weight of the dark. The figure's grin falters, its lips twitching, as if it's amused by my helplessness. It tilts its head to one side, its body shifting unnaturally, as though its joints don't belong to this world. Then it speaks, its voice a low, guttural rasp that vibrates through my skull. You can't escape. I want to fight back. I want to scream, to break free of whatever hold it has over me. But my body refuses to cooperate. I try to move my hands, but they feel like they're buried in concrete. I can't even close my eyes, can't look away from the twisted figure looming over me. Its eyes, those empty pits, seem to grow darker with every second that passes, swallowing the very light around us. It moves closer still, so close I can feel its presence, feel the air around me shift. I'm trapped. There's nowhere to run. The world around me is dissolving, collapsing into itself. The scraping sound grows deafening, a grinding noise that shakes the very ground beneath me. And then, something happens. A shift. A crack in the darkness. For a split second, the void around us breaks apart, revealing a flicker of light, a window, a door, something, but just as quickly, it vanishes. The darkness closes in again, tighter this time. The air is suffocating, thick with the stench of decay. I feel the creature's breath against my face now, hot and rancid, and I can't fight it anymore. I'm losing. I close my eyes. I try to block it out. But the figure's voice cuts through the darkness, clear and cold. You can't hide. You belong to me. The words echo in my mind, each syllable hammering into my skull like a nail. My chest tightens, and I feel my body begin to shake, a tremor I can't control. It's as if I'm being torn apart from the inside, my very essence unraveling, one thread at a time. And the worst part? I can't tell what's real anymore. Is this still a dream? Or is this my new reality? I try to remember the warmth of daylight, the feeling of the sun on my skin, but it slips away like sand through my fingers. Everything I've known, everything I was, is fading, crumbling into this suffocating blackness. And no matter how hard I try to scream, to fight back, it's always the same. I am trapped. I am not alone. And there's nothing I can do to escape. Have you ever felt that the walls around you are closing in? Not physically, but in a way that makes you question what's real and what isn't. I never understood it until now. It wasn't until I found myself standing in the middle of a place I thought I knew so well, only to realize that every step I took led me deeper into something far more terrifying. It all started with a simple move. A new house. Nothing special, just another old building on the edge of town. I was searching for a fresh start, something to leave the past behind. The house was quaint, far from the new-age luxury homes I had once dreamt of, but it was affordable. The kind of place you could imagine living in forever if you weren't looking too closely. At first, everything seemed fine. The rooms were spacious, the floors creaked like any old house would. The air smelled faintly of dust and the scent of old wood, but it was comfortable. I thought nothing of it. I didn't notice anything strange at first, just the usual unpacking and settling in. The kind of thing anyone would do when they moved into a new place. But then it began. The sounds at night. Soft. Unsettling. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, the wind against the walls, or maybe a raccoon scurrying along the roof. But as days turned into nights, I began to wonder. The sounds changed. The creaks turned into scraping noises, faint but constant. It was as if something, or someone, was moving in the shadows. I told myself it was just the stress of the move, the loneliness of being in a new place, far from familiar faces. I tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't let me. One night, I woke to the sound of something walking. Not outside, but inside the house. Step. 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 It wasn't the usual creaks. It was deliberate. Heavy. Slow. I tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things, but when I stepped out of my bedroom, the hallway looked different. It was darker, somehow. The wallpaper that had seemed so familiar now looked warped, the patterns shifting in ways they shouldn't have. The doorframe seemed to bend slightly, as if the house itself was alive, breathing. And that's when it hit me. The house was changing. Or rather, I was changing. My perception of it was slipping, as if it was becoming something else entirely. A place I thought I knew, now twisted and foreign. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. The air was thick with a tension I couldn't explain. I turned around, expecting to see the safe, familiar hallway I had walked through just hours ago. But instead, I was staring into a long, narrow corridor that I knew hadn't been there before. It felt like a dream, but the dread bubbling in my chest told me this was all too real. I walked forward, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. The floor was cold beneath my feet, colder than it should have been. The strange sensation that I was being watched grew stronger. I could hear faint whispers now, soft, distant, but unmistakable. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice barely more than a tremble. No response. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest, but the hallway was different. The end of it was no longer the exit I knew. It curved away, just enough to make me second-guess everything I thought I understood about the space I had once called home. I turned quickly, trying to find my bearings, but everything seemed to distort. The air grew denser, heavier. The familiar hallways twisted, expanding and contracting in ways they shouldn't. Panic rose in my throat. Was I losing my mind? Or was something truly wrong with this house? I glanced around, but the rooms no longer felt safe. The kitchen, once warm and inviting, was shrouded in an unnatural stillness. The living room felt vast, empty, like it stretched on forever. The house was no longer just a house. It had become something else, something alive. Suddenly, I heard it again, footsteps. But they weren't mine. They were slower, dragging, like something was moving, reluctant but determined. The sound came from the stairs leading down into the basement. I had never even considered going down there, but the thought of being trapped up here, alone, with whatever that sound was, filled me with dread. Something was in the house. Something that didn't belong. The air around me seemed to vibrate with the tension of waiting, like the entire structure was holding its breath. And then, in a low, almost imperceptible whisper, a voice spoke. "You're not supposed to be here." I froze, my blood running cold. The words echoed through the walls, a soft, guttural rasp that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound of breathing, heavy and labored, filled the air. I turned, desperately searching for the source. But all I saw were shadows, deep, unrelenting shadows, stretching unnaturally along the walls. And I knew. Deep down, I knew the house was no longer just a house. It was a maze. A labyrinth of my own making. But it wasn't only the house that was changing. It was me. And there was no way out. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was a trick of the mind, a side effect of stress. The move, the isolation, the strange sounds, they were all symptoms of something that could be explained. But the voice I'd heard, that whisper, seemed to cling to my thoughts like a shadow, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it refused to leave. I backed away from the stairs, feeling a cold sweat slick against my skin. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run. I wanted to escape this twisted place, but there was nowhere to go. The labyrinth of the house had already begun to distort my perception. It was as though the walls were growing closer, suffocating the air in every room. I stumbled into the living room, hoping for a moment of clarity, but it was no better. The furniture was arranged in strange configurations, as if someone had rearranged everything in the middle of the night. The couch I had just sat on was now facing the wall, the armchair overturned, its cushions ripped open as though something had been searching for something inside. I walked around, each step echoing unnervingly in the silence. The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something. My own breath was shallow, quick. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But then, the silence was shattered again. A soft rustling sound came from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the wind anymore. It wasn't the house settling. No, this was deliberate, slow, purposeful. Like something, or someone, was moving closer. I didn't want to look, but my body betrayed me. My legs moved before I could even think about it. I found myself standing at the end of the hallway, staring down the long corridor that led to the front door. But now, it didn't look like it had before. The door was gone. In its place was another doorway. A narrow, wooden frame that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The air around it shimmered, distorting the light in ways that made my stomach churn. I hesitated, feeling the familiar sense of dread wash over me. It wasn't just the house. It was something inside me, something that connected me to whatever was happening here. The walls, the floors, the very structure, it all felt like it was shifting, bending, as though reality itself was warping around me. I heard the rustling again. Closer now. I knew I wasn't alone. A voice, faint but unmistakable, called from the shadows. "Come closer. Don't be afraid." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, trapped in a house that was no longer just a house. It was a maze, a prison, and the walls were closing in faster than I could breathe. The whispering continued, growing louder, more insistent. It wasn't just one voice anymore. There were others. Low murmurs, like 1,000 voices speaking in unison, all calling my name. Come closer. Join us. I couldn't tell if it was real or if I was losing my mind. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly stepped forward, unable to stop myself. My fingers brushed against the cold surface of the doorframe, and I felt the chill seep into my bones. I stepped into the doorway, the air thick and suffocating. The moment I did, the world around me shifted. The hallway behind me was gone, replaced by a narrow, dimly lit passage. I turned back, but there was nothing familiar left. No stairs. No front door. Just a maze of twisting corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. It was as though the house had swallowed my words. Panic flooded my chest, and I realized there was no way out. The walls closed in around me, the passage shrinking with every step I took. I was being swallowed whole by the very thing that had once seemed like a sanctuary. And then I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the narrow space. I turned, expecting to see something, someone, but there was nothing there. Just the cold, suffocating air and the creeping realization that I was no longer alone. I tried to run, but the labyrinth was too much. The walls seemed to move, shifting as if they had a mind of their own. Every turn I took led to another hallway, another room that looked identical to the last. It was as if the house was playing with me, forcing me deeper into its labyrinthine heart. I could feel my sanity slipping away, piece by piece. Each time I turned a corner, I hoped to find an exit. But there was no escape. The whispering voices grew louder, now a cacophony of distorted, mocking tones. They seemed to be everywhere, closing in on me. You shouldn't have come, one of them hissed. You're part of it now. I stumbled, falling to the floor, my hands scraping against the cold wood. I looked around, but there was no way to orient myself. The walls shifted, twisted, and I realized, with a chilling clarity, that the house had no intention of letting me go. I had become a part of it, just as the voices had said. There was no escape. No way out. And I was beginning to understand the house wasn't just a labyrinth of hallways and rooms. It was a labyrinth of the mind. And I was trapped inside it. I stood up, feeling the weight of the walls pressing in on me. There was nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. I could hear the footsteps again, closer this time, and I knew that whatever was following me was far worse than any fear I had ever felt. The walls closed in, and the darkness swallowed me whole. The darkness wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket, swallowing all the light, every trace of hope. My breath came in shallow gasps as I staggered through the passage, each step seemingly leading me deeper into a nightmare. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, like the heartbeat of something ancient and alive. I reached out, my hands trembling, searching for something, anything, to steady myself. The air was thick with a strange, metallic scent, like blood or rust. It clung to my skin, settling into my lungs as I tried to ignore the nausea creeping up my throat. Every sound, every shift in the atmosphere made my heart pound harder, the noise of my own panic deafening. And then I heard it. A creak. A low, guttural sound that reverberated through the very bones of the house. It wasn't the usual groaning of old wood or the settling of the structure. This was deliberate, purposeful. As though something was moving, something much heavier than any human could be. I froze, my blood running cold. A shadow flickered in the corner of my eye, just out of reach. It didn't move like any shadow I had ever seen. It seemed to crawl, slow and deliberate, like it was aware of me, watching me from the darkness. I turned quickly, but nothing was there, only the hallway, stretching endlessly before me, the doorways shifting at the edges of my vision. I felt it again. The eyes. Watching. Always watching. I spun around, but it was just the walls, the narrow passage, the endless stretch of corridors. But the sense of being followed, of something lurking just beyond the light, was unbearable. The walls weren't just walls anymore. They were a cage, pressing closer with every passing second, each breath a struggle for freedom I couldn't reach. I wanted to scream, but the air felt like it had thickened, choking me, making my throat burn. There was no escape from this place. Suddenly, the floor beneath me groaned, a deep, unsettling sound that made my spine go rigid. I glanced down and saw it, a faint crack, running through the wood like a vein. It spread slowly, inch by inch, as though the very floor was alive and trying to swallow me whole. I staggered back, my heart racing, as the crack widened. The house itself seemed to be reacting to my fear, feeding off it, growing more hostile, more alive with every moment. I turned and bolted down the hallway, not thinking, just running. The footsteps that had been stalking me began again, louder now, closer, echoing off the walls in a twisted rhythm. They were not my own. Someone, or something, was following me. I could hear it, feel it, even as I tried to outrun it. But the more I ran, the less the house made sense. Always twisted unnaturally. The rooms I passed through looked like reflections in a cracked mirror, familiar but wrong, warped by the distortion of my mind. Each turn I made led to another dead end, another path that disappeared into shadow. And then, I found it. The door. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. A door that hadn't been there before? Or had I just missed it in my panic? It stood at the far end of a long, darkened corridor, its wooden frame worn and cracked, with a faint glow spilling from beneath it. A soft, welcoming light that almost seemed to call to me. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The closer I got, the more I felt like I was stepping into something I wasn't meant to understand. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the cold handle. It was oddly smooth, as if it had been recently polished. The moment my fingers brushed the metal, the door creaked open, and I was hit with a rush of air, a blast of cold that sent shivers down my spine. Behind it lay a room, but it wasn't like the others. It was large, empty, the walls covered in what looked like mirrors. Thousands of mirrors, stretching from floor to ceiling, reflecting my every move. I stepped in, my breath catching in my throat. The mirrors seemed to pulse, breathing with me, as if alive. The reflections shifted, distorted, showing versions of myself I didn't recognize, broken, fragmented, disfigured. I staggered back, horrified, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. My heart lurched as the room seemed to close in on me. The mirrors grew darker, the reflections twisting into something more sinister. I was not alone. The mirrors flickered, and for a moment, I saw it. The thing that had been following me, the thing that had haunted the labyrinth. It wasn't human. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that twisted and stretched unnaturally. Its skin was pale and slick, like the surface of a corpse submerged in water. Its eyes were wide, black pits, and they were fixed on me, unblinking. I could feel its presence, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just in the mirrors, it was in the room with me, breathing down my neck, its movements almost imperceptible, but there, always there, just beyond my reach. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, tight, as if the air itself was choking me. I reached for the door, but it wouldn't open. It was stuck, as if the house itself had sealed me in. The thing stepped forward, its footfall slow and deliberate, its gaze never leaving mine. Each movement seemed to draw the darkness closer, pulling me into its depths. I was trapped. There was no escape. The whispers returned, louder than before. The voices, the ones I had heard all along, filled the air like a chorus of the damned. "Join us," they said. "It's too late. You're part of it now." And I understood. I understood that this house, this labyrinth, it was not just a place. It was a reflection of something far darker. Something inside me. Something I could never outrun. I closed my eyes, but the darkness followed me, the thing still there, waiting, watching. And in the silence that followed, I realized the truth. I had always been part of the labyrinth. It was never the house that trapped me. It was myself. The air in the room grew colder, the temperature dropping so quickly that I could see my breath clouding in front of me. The thing, whatever it was, loomed in the shadows, its presence so oppressive that it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. My heart raced, my hands trembling as I searched desperately for a way out. I reached out, slamming my fists against the door, but it didn't budge. The mirrors around me seemed to grow larger, their reflections warping, distorting with each frantic movement I made. The images of myself in the mirrors no longer looked human. They were twisted, broken versions of me, horrible and unnatural. My own eyes stared back at me, wide and pleading, but they were not my eyes anymore. They were lost, consumed by whatever darkness this place had become. I took a step back, my breath hitching as I realized I was trapped in a room of horrors, a place where the very fabric of reality was falling apart. The mirrors, once reflections of myself, now seemed to show other things, faces that were unfamiliar, distant, like specters from another time, another life. Their mouths moved, but no sound came from them. Only the weight of their silent, accusing gaze. Then, I heard it again. A soft scrape, like nails against glass. A low, continuous sound, like something or someone dragging itself closer to me. My body went cold. I turned slowly, my eyes widening as I saw it. The thing that had been following me was no longer just in the mirrors. It was standing there, in the corner of the room, a mass of shifting shadows and long, spindly limbs. Its form was indistinct, like a human outline smeared in ink. It had no face, just those endless, black eyes that seemed to bore into my very soul. I could feel its gaze on me, burning, suffocating. My legs felt like they were made of stone, unable to move, rooted to the spot by an overwhelming sense of dread. The creature's mouth opened, but there was no sound, only a wave of cold, a pressure that seemed to collapse the air around me. I stumbled backward, my mind screaming for me to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. My heart hammered in my chest, the panic rising with every passing second. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry, so dry it hurt. "Please," I whispered, though I knew it wouldn't help. I knew it was already too late. The creature didn't respond. It simply moved. Its limbs contorted in unnatural ways as it glided across the room, its body stretching and contracting like something out of a nightmare. I could hear the scrape of its limbs against the floor, each movement sending a tremor of fear through me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I wanted to run, but the room, this damn room, kept shifting, the walls closing in, the door remaining locked and unreachable. I was being suffocated by it. By the house. By the labyrinth. And then I saw it. In the farthest corner of the room, barely visible at first, was a new door. It was smaller, almost hidden behind a tangle of shadows, but it was there. A way out. A way to escape. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I bolted toward it, my hands reaching desperately for the handle. The cold metal burned against my skin, but I didn't care. I turned it, forcing the door open with every ounce of strength I had left. The moment the door cracked open, the light from the other side spilled into the room, washing over me like a wave of warmth, pushing back the shadows, but I could still feel it, the thing, right behind me. The moment I stepped through, I felt it. The oppressive weight of the house was gone, replaced by a sharp, biting chill. The hallway outside the room was dark, but I could see the outlines of stairs, a soft glow in the distance. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound so final that it echoed through my skull. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran. Each step was heavier than the last, as if the house itself was pulling at my feet, dragging me back into its depths. The sound of footsteps echoed around me, the sensation of being watched never leaving, like a breath on the back of my neck. The shadows pressed in from all sides, narrowing the hallway, but I kept going, heart pounding, mind racing. I reached the stairs and climbed them quickly, trying not to look back, but I could feel it there, something waiting. I could hear it breathing, soft and slow, just out of reach. The house seemed to twist again, the stairs curving in unnatural angles, the walls narrowing, distorting. And then I heard something. A voice. Join us. It wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone's I recognized. It was a whisper, soft, but unmistakable, and it came from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the air around me. I froze, my feet faltering as I reached the top of the stairs. There, at the end of the hallway, was another door. It was different, new, yet old, like it had always been there and I had never noticed. I stepped toward it, trembling, knowing I had no choice but to keep moving. But just before I reached for the handle, I felt something behind me, something pulling at my soul. Please, let me out. I whispered, my voice barely audible. But the door wouldn't open. It was locked, as if mocking me. And as I stood there, helpless, the creature emerged from the darkness, its eyes locked onto mine. I knew it wasn't just the house that had trapped me. It was everything. And I had become part of it. The door clicked open. I stepped through the door, but the moment I did, it slammed shut behind me. The sound was deafening, echoing like the final nail in a coffin. My breath caught in my throat. The air in this new room was thick, heavy with something I couldn't place, something wrong. A bitter, metallic tang lingered in the air, like blood or rust. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the rising panic that gripped my chest. The room I found myself in was nothing like the others. It was smaller, with a low ceiling that seemed to close in on me. The walls were cracked, peeling, as though they had been suffocating for years. The faint, flickering light from a single bulb overhead barely cut through the darkness, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to shift on their own. The floor was damp beneath my feet, the cold seeping through the soles of my shoes, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I could feel the presence, just beyond the edges of my vision, lurking. The silence was oppressive. And then, the whispers began again. Join us. It was a chorus of voices, distorted, broken, overlapping, like they were coming from all directions, filling the room. The words were incomprehensible, a disjointed jumble of sounds that made my head throb with the effort to understand. But I couldn't. I could only feel them, pushing against my mind, their cold fingers curling around my thoughts, squeezing tighter and tighter until I thought I might suffocate. Not again, I whispered to myself. I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want to feel them. But it was too late. The air grew heavier with each passing second, the room stretching, warping as if it were alive. The walls groaned, their surfaces rippling like water disturbed by a stone. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest, but the room seemed to shift around me, trapping me in place. The whispers grew louder, sharper, until they were all I could hear. A sudden movement in the corner of the room caught my eye. I turned, my breath catching in my throat as I saw it. The figure. It was hunched, its limbs twisted and wrong, like a reflection in a cracked mirror. Its skin was pale, translucent, and its face was contorted into something almost human, but not quite, eyes wide and empty, mouth stretched into a grotesque grin that didn't reach its hollow eyes. It was standing perfectly still, staring at me, as though waiting for something. For me to move. To make a sound. To break. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But the words, the movement, the very thought of escape, it was all suffocated by the crushing pressure of the air around me. Do you see it? One of the voices asked, its tone slow and mocking. Do you see what you've become? I froze, the question hanging in the air like a threat. A dark memory flashed through my mind, a flash of faces, of voices, of the past that I had tried so hard to bury. The guilt that had gnawed at me for so long surged to the surface. My breath came faster as the creature in the corner tilted its head, as if sensing my turmoil, feeding off it. Leave me alone, I choked out, but the words felt like they were being swallowed by the very air itself. The figure didn't move. It didn't need to. It was the house. The walls. The mirrors. They had all come alive, feeding on my fear, my weakness. It knew everything. It had always known. I reached into my pocket, desperate for something, anything, that could break this cycle. My fingers brushed against something cold, smooth. A key. It was small, unassuming, and yet it felt heavy in my hand. I didn't remember putting it there, didn't remember even finding it. But it was here, in my palm, as though it had always been. I didn't question it. I didn't care. I had to escape. Without thinking, I rushed to the far wall where I could see a small, rusted door, barely visible in the shadows. The key fit perfectly into the lock. My hand shook as I turned it, the click of the mechanism sending a jolt of hope through my chest. The door creaked open, revealing another dark passage beyond. I stepped through without hesitation, my heart racing in my chest. But the moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, and I was plunged into darkness. My pulse raced, my hands flying out to find some semblance of stability. I felt the walls, rough, uneven, and then the faint sound of breathing just behind me. Cold, wet breath. I spun around, but nothing was there. Just the suffocating dark. Not this time, I whispered to the empty space, my voice trembling with defiance. I had to keep moving. If I stopped, if I let myself doubt, I knew what would happen. The whispers followed me, crawling under my skin, slithering through the darkness like insects. Join us, they sang. You are one of us now. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. I pressed on, deeper into the labyrinth. The walls were closing in, but I pushed through them, my mind numb to the creeping fear that still clung to my thoughts. I had no choice. There was no turning back. What if everything you remember is a lie? The question gnawed at me, eating away at the edges of my mind. It wasn't the first time it had crossed my thoughts, but tonight it lingered. The kind of thought that claws its way deeper into the soul, making you second-guess even the simplest of memories. The events of my life, those I had once held so firmly, were now slipping through my fingers, like sand in the wind. I sat on the edge of my bed, the dim light of the lamp casting long, stretching shadows across the walls of the small apartment. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. But the silence, that eerie stillness, felt heavier than usual tonight. It felt as though something was watching, lurking just beyond the reach of my awareness. I could feel the weight of it, the pressure in the air. The last few days had been like this, an unrelenting sense of unease, a constant tension in the back of my mind that made it hard to concentrate. Every small noise seemed amplified, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains. I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me when I was alone, voices murmuring in the distance. But when I turned around, no one was there. When I looked outside, the street was empty, the only movement the slow drift of the wind across the darkened pavement. The unsettling feeling was growing, creeping through the walls of my apartment, settling into every corner of the room. But it wasn't just the feeling of being watched. It was something else, something deeper. My memories, the very foundation of who I thought I was, were beginning to blur. The lines between what had happened and what I had imagined were starting to dissolve. I couldn't tell if the faces I saw in my dreams were real or just fragments of my imagination. The places I had been as a child, the people I had met, the conversations I had, they all felt distant, unfamiliar. Yet, when I tried to grasp onto them, to recall the details, they slipped away like smoke. It was like I was forgetting things faster than I could remember them. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thought. I needed to focus, to calm myself. But the doubt, the gnawing fear that everything was starting to unravel, kept creeping back. It was as if someone, or something, was slowly, deliberately pulling the strings of my memories, warping them, making them impossible to trust. I looked down at the clock on the nightstand. It was late. Too late for my mind to be racing like this. I needed to sleep. But even as I told myself that, I knew it wasn't just the lack of sleep that was making me feel this way. Something else was wrong. Something beyond my understanding. Something that had been growing, hidden beneath the surface, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I glanced around the room. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper. The furniture was old but functional. A small kitchen sat in the corner, with a stack of dishes waiting to be cleaned. It was all so ordinary. Nothing about the apartment suggested that anything was amiss. Yet, in the quiet, I felt it, like the room itself was somehow different. The shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting as though they were alive. The lamp flickered, casting fleeting moments of darkness, followed by flashes of light. The air grew thick, heavy. The feeling of being watched intensified, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. I could sense something. Something close. The floorboards creaked. I froze. The sound wasn't like the usual groan of the building settling. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was moving in the hallway outside. My heart skipped a beat. I held my breath, waiting for the sound to repeat. It didn't. I slowly stood up from the bed, my legs shaky beneath me. I didn't want to look, didn't want to move, but I couldn't stay here. I had to know what was out there. I crept toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. My reflection in the mirror beside it caught my eye, but it didn't seem like me. The face staring back was too pale, too distant. It looked like someone I didn't recognize. Someone who didn't belong here. I jerked my gaze away from the mirror, pushing the door open just a crack. Nothing. The hallway was dark and silent. The old wooden floor stretched out in both directions, but no one was there. I stepped into the hallway, the smell of dust and something faintly metallic filling my nostrils. The shadows clung to the corners, deeper than they should have been, twisting and contorting as though they were alive. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my nerves. But the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, made my skin crawl. I wasn't alone. I couldn't be. I moved further into the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the worn carpet beneath me. Each room I passed was eerily still, as though they were holding their breath. My own breath felt shallow, quick, as though I was preparing for something. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. Not alone. My body tensed, every muscle going rigid. I spun around, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't make sense of it. But I felt the truth of it. The doubt had settled deep into my bones, and now it was spreading. Not alone. I pressed my back against the wall, staring down the empty hallway. The words echoed in my mind, growing louder, more insistent. Who was saying that? What was it? Suddenly, a cold gust of air rushed past me, and the light above flickered violently before going out completely, plunging me into darkness. I froze. The fear gripped me, suffocating. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then, a voice, clearer now, whispering in my ear. You've forgotten. I stumbled back, my hand grasping the wall for support, my heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the voice, the whisper, lingered, haunting me as I stood there in the dark, struggling to hold on to the fragments of my sanity. The darkness pressed in on me, suffocating. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my hands shook as I fumbled for the light switch, but it was useless. The power had gone out completely. The only sound was the pounding of my heart in my ears, loud and insistent, a drumbeat that drowned out everything else. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the voice, the whisper in my ear. You've forgotten. What had I forgotten? What could it mean? I pressed my back harder against the wall, every nerve on high alert. The silence that followed felt even heavier, like it was waiting for something. For me to move. For me to make a sound. I had to do something. I had to get out of here, but the hallway seemed endless. The shadows seemed to grow, stretching out of their corners, darkening the already dim space around me. Then, I heard it again, faint, but unmistakable. Not alone. The voice wasn't just in my ear anymore. It was all around me, as though the walls themselves were speaking. My pulse quickened, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. I clenched my fists, trying to fight the rising panic. I wasn't crazy. I couldn't be. This had to be real. Someone was here. But there was no one. I looked around frantically, searching the dark for any sign of life. Nothing. The house felt like it was closing in on me. The air was thick, and the walls seemed to pulse, as though the very structure was alive, breathing. I took a step forward, my foot dragging as if it were fighting against me. The floorboards creaked beneath me, and I winced at the sound, terrified that whatever was in the dark would hear it too. But there was no turning back now. I had to find out what was happening, what I was hearing, what was happening to me. I forced myself to move down the hallway, keeping my hand pressed against the wall for support. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the floor itself was trying to keep me grounded in place. I reached the end of the hall and hesitated before opening the door to the living room. The room beyond was pitch black, the only light coming from the slivers of moonlight seeping in through the curtains. I stepped into the room, the air here even colder than the hallway. It felt unnatural, the way the chill settled into my bones. The space looked the same as it always had, furniture arranged as I left it, nothing out of place. But that was the problem. It felt wrong. Nothing felt familiar anymore. It was as though I had stepped into a version of this room that wasn't mine, a room that was only pretending to be real. I glanced around, my eyes scanning the shadows. The walls loomed large, the dark corners threatening to swallow everything in their depths. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand here, waiting for whatever was happening to consume me. My eyes fell on the mirror across the room. It was large, the kind of mirror you'd expect to see in a living room, framed in dark wood. I hadn't noticed it earlier, but now it seemed impossible to ignore. The reflection in the glass was wrong. It wasn't just the way the shadows danced or the fact that the room seemed darker around it. There was something off about my own reflection. I took a step closer, my breath catching in my throat. I could see myself, but not clearly. The image was blurry, distorted. My face looked as though it were shifting, melting, like someone had taken a photo of me and stretched it out, blurred the edges until it became something unrecognizable. And then, just as I was about to turn away, something else happened. A movement. Not in the mirror, but in the reflection of the room. Something shifted just beyond the edge of the glass, someone standing behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing. The room was empty. I turned back to the mirror, my eyes wide in terror. The figure was still there. It stood just behind me, its form barely visible in the dim light. I could see its outline, tall and hunched, the shape of its face distorted. It was too dark to make out any real details, but I could feel its presence. The air in the room grew heavier, suffocating. The figure moved closer. My own reflection stood frozen, watching as the shadow approached. I couldn't breathe. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as though I were frozen in place, caught in some kind of trap. The figure's face became clearer in the reflection. It wasn't human. The eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were too large, too dark, and there was something in them. Something familiar. Something I couldn't place. The figure reached out, its hand stretching toward me. I screamed, finally managing to break free of whatever held it on me. I stumbled backward, colliding with the wall as I tried to tear my eyes away from the mirror. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in desperate gasps. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. The reflection was normal. The room was empty. Had I imagined it? I stood there, staring at the mirror, trying to make sense of what I had seen. My mind reeled, and the darkness seemed to grow thicker around me. The voice whispered again, faint and distant. "You've forgotten." I felt a surge of panic, and I knew that I couldn't keep running from whatever this was. I needed to understand. I needed to know what was happening before I lost myself entirely. But as I turned to leave the room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door to the hallway, which had been shut when I entered, was now open. And standing in the doorway was a figure. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was real. And it was waiting for me. I froze, my body paralyzed by fear. The figure in the doorway was tall, its form draped in shadow, but somehow still distinct. It stood there, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for me all along. The darkness around it seemed to bend, as though the very air was thickening, pressing down on my chest. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I could feel its gaze, heavy, unblinking, like a weight on my soul. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "Who's there?" My voice came out weaker than I intended, cracking like a whisper caught in a storm. There was no answer, just the silence. The oppressive, suffocating silence that filled every inch of the room. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. But somehow, I could feel it. It knew me. I didn't know how, but I could feel it deep in my bones, like it had been a part of me all along, waiting for this moment. I tried to take a step back, but my legs refused to obey. It was like I was rooted to the spot, trapped in my own terror. I strained my eyes, trying to make out any details of the figure, but it was as if the light itself recoiled from it, casting it deeper into shadow. I couldn't tell whether it was human or something else entirely. There was something wrong with its proportions, too long, too still, like an unsettling puppet caught between movement and stasis. Then, I heard it, the faintest whisper, like a breeze stirring through 1,000 leaves. "You remember me, don't you?" The words cut through the silence, slicing into my mind. My heart raced, hammering against my ribcage as my thoughts spun in chaotic circles. The voice, was it the same as the one I heard earlier? Was it real, or was I losing my grip on reality entirely? "Who are you?" My words trembled, barely audible. But the figure didn't respond. It didn't need to. It didn't have to. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the horrible certainty that it knew everything about me. Everything. Even the things I couldn't remember. The things I didn't want to remember. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in, the air stifling. I felt as if I were suffocating, drowning in a sea of shadows and whispers. I looked around the room, desperately searching for something to anchor me. But nothing was the same. The furniture seemed out of place, wrong. The shadows twisted, distorted, as though they were trying to crawl away from the figure in the doorway. I tried to take another step back, but this time my legs buckled beneath me. I collapsed to the floor, my hands instinctively reaching out for something to hold onto, anything to steady myself. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I felt the figure move, slow and deliberate. Its presence grew, filling the room like a rising tide. Every step it took was like a drumbeat echoing in my skull, each one sending shockwaves of terror through my body. And then, just as I thought I would lose my mind, I heard its voice again, this time, clearer, more distinct. "You've forgotten, but I haven't." I blinked, my mind struggling to process the words. Forgotten? Forgotten what? My thoughts were a tangled mess, slipping through my fingers like sand. What had I forgotten? What was this thing, and why was it here? The figure took another step forward, and with it, a cold gust of air swept through the room. It chilled my skin, numbing me, making it harder to think. My eyes were locked on the figure, unwilling to look away, even as my instincts screamed at me to run. It was then that I realized something else, something far more unsettling. The reflection in the mirror wasn't mine anymore. I turned my head toward the glass. There, in the dim light, I saw a twisted version of myself. My reflection was contorted, eyes wide and hollow, skin pale and stretched. It was as if my reflection was pleading for help, but it couldn't move, couldn't escape the frozen horror of the mirror. And behind it, standing there, in the reflection, was the figure. Not in the doorway, but inside the room with me, right behind me. My breath caught in my throat. I could see its face more clearly now, or what passed for a face. It was human-like, but stretched, elongated, the features warped and unnatural. Its eyes were large, black voids, empty and cold, yet somehow filled with an infinite sadness. The mouth was too wide, too thin, like it had been carved into the face, a cruel mockery of a smile. Why? Why are you doing this? My voice cracked, raw with desperation, but there was no response. The figure only stood there, unmoving, as if it were waiting for something. Or maybe, for me to remember. I felt a jolt of recognition deep within me, like a memory trying to break through the fog in my mind. A flash, brief and fleeting, but there, something familiar about the figure, something I couldn't quite place. The more I tried to focus, the more it slipped away, like a dream fading into the morning light. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if amused by my struggle. And then, it moved. Slowly, it reached out, its hand stretching toward me, each finger long and twisted, like some kind of grotesque puppet. My heart pounded in my chest, the air thickening with each passing second. I scrambled back, but the floor seemed to close in around me, trapping me in place. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew one thing: if it touched me, if it got close enough, I might never escape. With a final, desperate effort, I pushed myself to my feet, my legs shaking. I had to get away. I had to. The lights flickered, and the world around me tilted, warping. The figure's hand was inches from me now, and I couldn't breathe. Everything blurred. The walls, the shadows, the figure, all of it dissolved into a haze of confusion and fear. And then, nothing. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. The mirror caught my eye once again. My reflection was still there, but this time it wasn't just distorted. It was smiling. And I wasn't. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror. The reflection, no longer just a twisted version of me, was grinning. A wide, malicious smile that stretched unnaturally across my face. But it wasn't my smile. It was something else, something I had never seen before, something monstrous. The reflection of me stood there, motionless except for the grin. I felt a chill run down my spine, my heart pounding in my chest. My legs were trembling, like they were going to give way at any moment, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away from that smile. The room around me felt wrong. The air grew colder with every passing second, as if the temperature was dropping by degrees, taking the warmth of the space with it. My breath clouded in front of me, like I was standing in the heart of winter, but the windows were shut. The smell of dampness filled the room, like the air had been trapped here for years, waiting. I backed away slowly, my hands trembling at my sides. What was happening? Why was this reflection so wrong? And why couldn't I shake the feeling that something else was in the room with me? I turned around, looking frantically for any sign of movement. The dark corners of the room seemed to loom larger, stretching out with an almost living presence. My eyes darted to the door, still wide open. The hallway beyond was just as dark, but I couldn't escape. Not yet. I tried to focus, tried to breathe, but the weight of the atmosphere was crushing. Something was coming. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. The walls seemed to press closer, the space shrinking, suffocating. And then I heard it. A sound, soft at first, barely perceptible above the thudding of my heart. It was coming from the mirror. I dared not look at it directly, but I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, my gaze moved toward the glass again. The figure in the reflection was still there. But now, its grin had widened, if possible, even further. The smile wasn't just twisted, it was sinister, mocking. The eyes, the voids that should have been eyes, stared into mine with an intensity that felt like it was reaching into my very soul. The figure moved. Not just a subtle shift, but a deliberate step forward, its form stretching impossibly, as if it was going to crawl out of the mirror and into the room with me. I stumbled backward, my foot hitting something soft, a cushion on the floor that I didn't remember being there. But there was no time to wonder about that now. I had to get away. I turned, bolting for the door, but when I reached it, I froze. The hallway was no longer the way I remembered it. The shadows were deeper, darker, twisting in unnatural shapes, as if they were alive. The walls stretched and contracted with each beat of my pulse, and the air was thick with something foul, sour, almost like rot. I grabbed the door handle, yanking it open, but as soon as I did, the temperature in the room dropped again, a cold rush sweeping past me like a violent gust of wind. I slammed the door shut, heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My feet were rooted to the floor. It was then that I heard the whispers. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, but they grew louder with each passing moment. They were all around me, rising from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The sound of it was maddening, hissing, murmuring, like the house itself was alive, breathing and speaking in a language I couldn't understand. "You can't leave." The voice echoed, too familiar, too close. It was the same voice I had heard before, the one that had whispered in my ear, the one that had followed me from the moment I stepped into this nightmare. But now, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a command, a truth. I turned in panic, scanning the room again. The reflection in the mirror hadn't changed. The figure was still there, still moving closer, its hand outstretched toward me. A flash of memory, so brief, so fleeting that it could have been a dream. But in that moment, I remembered something. I had seen this before. This figure. This place. The house was mine, but it wasn't. This wasn't just a place of memories, it was the place I had buried them. The memories, the nightmares. The things I had forgotten, or rather, had tried to forget. I had come back here, not by choice, but by design. This figure, it was me. The reflection in the glass wasn't just mocking me, it was showing me something I had hidden from myself. The twisted version of myself that I had locked away, buried deep inside. I wasn't alone in this room. And I never had been. I couldn't remember everything, but I knew this much. The house, the shadows, the figure, they were all tied to me. To my mind. To my memory. But that didn't make it any less real. I stumbled backward, falling to the floor as the whispers grew louder, the voices merging together in a cacophony of madness. I covered my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was inside my head. I could feel it, like a presence, pressing on me, suffocating me. "You've forgotten," the voice said again, and this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a shout, an accusation. "You've forgotten what you did." I closed my eyes, squeezing them shut as the pressure in the room mounted, threatening to crush me. What had I done? A terrible thought emerged, like a splinter deep inside my mind. Had I created this? Had I been the one to summon this nightmare? Was I the one who had buried this part of myself, locked it away, and forgotten it? I opened my eyes, staring at the reflection again. The figure was right there, its grin wider than ever. It was coming for me. And in that moment, I understood. It was never going to let me go. I couldn't escape. Not from it. Not from myself. But then, just as the figure reached out, the room was swallowed by darkness. And everything went quiet. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. I wasn't sure if I was awake or still dreaming. But as I lay there, frozen in the silence, one final thought drifted through my mind. Was this real? The silence pressed against me, a heavy weight that suffocated the air, turning it thick and suffocating. I couldn't tell if I had been unconscious or if the world had simply stopped. The last thing I remembered was the darkness swallowing me whole, but now there was only this oppressive quiet. I opened my eyes, slowly, cautiously. The room I found myself in was unfamiliar. The walls were bare, the floor covered in a thin layer of dust, as though no one had walked here for years. The ceiling above me was low, dark shadows crawling across it like the fingers of a forgotten nightmare. My head throbbed, the pulse in my temple sharp, as if something inside my mind was pushing against the skull, trying to break free. I lifted my hand to my forehead, rubbing the ache, trying to clear the fog that clouded my thoughts. But the more I tried to focus, the more the memories slipped through my fingers like sand. Where was I? How had I gotten here? I pushed myself off the floor, standing shakily on unsteady legs, as though the ground beneath me was unsure of its own existence. The room smelled musty, like damp wood and stale air. I turned around, eyes scanning my surroundings for something familiar, anything that might offer an explanation. But the walls seemed to stretch in every direction, warping like they were made of elastic, ready to snap back at any moment. I felt a tremor in my hand as I reached for the door. The doorknob was cold against my skin, as if it had been waiting for me. When I opened the door, the hallway beyond was empty, stretching endlessly into the darkness, just like the room I had woken up in. My chest tightened, panic seizing me for the briefest moment. Where was the way out? I couldn't stay in this place any longer. Every corner seemed to hide a secret, every crack in the walls felt like it was watching me. The whispers from earlier echoed in my ears again, but they weren't coming from the walls this time. They were inside my head. A steady murmur that grew louder with every passing second. You can't leave. You can't remember. I slammed my palm against my forehead, trying to block out the voice, the constant pressure building in my skull. Stop, I whispered, but the words felt foreign, like they weren't even my own. I need to get out. I stumbled into the hallway, my feet dragging along the creaky floorboards. The house seemed endless, the hall stretching out before me like a never-ending tunnel. The walls were cracked, the paint peeling like old skin. But what caught my eye was the door at the far end of the hall, just barely visible through the haze of shadows. It looked like the door I had opened earlier. No, it was the door I had opened earlier, but there was something off about it now. The shadows around it were darker, more oppressive, as if they were alive, curling and twisting in ways that defied logic. A part of me wanted to run, to turn and escape while I still could. But another part, a part that felt strange, even wrong, urged me to move closer, to approach the door as if I had no other choice. As I walked toward it, the whispers returned, louder, almost deafening now. You remember. You have to remember. My heart raced. What was I supposed to remember? What had I forgotten? The answer gnawed at the edges of my consciousness, but it was just out of reach. When I reached the door, I paused. The handle was cold in my hand, a sharp chill running up my arm as I gripped it. I hesitated, staring at the door. It looked familiar. Not in the way a place does when you've visited it before, but in the way something forgotten feels when it surfaces from the depths of your mind. My breath hitched in my throat. I knew what lay behind that door, but I didn't know how. I couldn't remember how. With a shudder, I twisted the handle and pushed the door open. Inside was a room I had never seen before, but it felt as though I had. The walls were lined with old furniture, dusty and broken, as though the room had been abandoned for years. The window was cracked, letting in a sliver of light that barely touched the floor. But what stood out the most was the mirror, standing tall against the far wall. The same mirror. The one from before. The one that had reflected a twisted version of me. I froze, the air in the room suddenly becoming unbearable. No. Not this. Not again. But my feet carried me toward it anyway. My legs moved on their own, as if I had no control over my body. The closer I got, the more the whispering grew, until it was a chorus of voices, all chanting the same thing. Look. Look at yourself. I reached out to touch the glass, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the surface. It was ice cold. The mirror seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in the reflection, but when I blinked, it was gone. I stared into the glass, expecting to see my own reflection. But instead, I saw something else. The figure. The same twisted reflection that had grinned at me before. It was standing behind me, its face contorted into a horrific smile, its eyes hollow, empty. I jerked around, my breath catching in my throat. But there was nothing there. No figure. No movement. Just the empty, quiet room. I turned back to the mirror, but this time it wasn't empty. The reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was a distorted version of me, twisted, broken, with eyes that seemed to stare right through me, like they were searching for something buried deep within me. You remember, don't you? The voice was soft, but it rang in my ears. You can't hide from it. Not anymore. The reflection in the glass smirked. And suddenly, I wasn't alone. I could feel it, the presence, the weight of something behind me, closing in. It pressed against my back, cold and suffocating. The whispering grew louder, blending into a single voice that spoke in a language I didn't understand, but felt deep in my bones. I spun around, but the room was still empty. Then, in the corner of my eye, something shifted. I saw it, a shadow, long and jagged, crawling along the wall. My breath hitched. It was coming closer, moving in the periphery of my vision, like it was following my every step. I turned to run, but the hallway ahead was no longer the way it had been. The walls seemed to bend and twist, and the door I had come through was gone. There was no way out. The darkness swallowed me whole. And this time, I didn't wake up. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.